Hello, everyone, and welcome to the BI Livecast series. My name is Andrea Orth, and I'm the VP of Member Services here at Brand Innovators. Welcome to today's livecast, which is all about predictions for 2022. Today is really special, and I'm thrilled to kick it off. We've got a phenomenal event with an awesome lineup of marketers coming to us virtually from companies like MassMutual, Square, Georgia Pacific, and Thistle. First, we'd like to thank all of the marketers for taking the time to speak and present on our virtual stage today. We'd also like to give a big shout out to our sponsors for helping make this event possible and for leading our discussions. Last but not least, we'd like to thank our audience for taking the time to be here with us today and hear from some of the best in the industry. Remember, we're live, so please use the Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen to submit any questions for our speakers, and we'll get to them at the end of each session. The chat widget is there too. It's just for our audience and listeners at home. Feel free to use that to connect with your fellow attendees and discuss the event in real time. Now, I'd love to welcome to the stage our first speakers. Please welcome Jennifer Halloran, Head of Marketing and Brand for MassMutual. She'll be joining us in a moment. Welcome, Jennifer. She'll be joined by Suraj Barwani, the Chief Strategy Officer at Acuity Ads. Welcome, Suraj. How are you? I think you are still on mute. Perfect. I see you both here. Hi, Jennifer and Suraj. How are you?
Yeah, doing fine. That's the thing. I'm on mute. No, I'm not. Not anymore.
No, Jennifer, I think you're here as well. Hi.
How are you?
Good. Thank you. Thanks for joining us today. And you guys are kicking off our session today for our 22 predictions. I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say. And Suraj, I'll let you take it from here.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Oh, hello, Jennifer. How are you?
Very good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. So let me just do a little introduction here briefly, Jennifer, and then we will get to learn and know more about you as well, because I'm sure our audience wants to learn about you. So this is Suraj Barwani, Chief Strategy Officer at Acuity Ads, the publicly owned company, Canadian company that invented Illumin, the first omni-channel journey automation platform in the ad tech industry. So with me here today is Jennifer, head of marketing, and my goodness, frankly, Jennifer, you're the one I'm going to ask to introduce yourself and talk about both your company and your background. It would be fabulous to hear. Now, I must tell the audience, so Jennifer and I go back, God knows, in the late 90s. And frankly, between you and I, there is the entire history of digital advertising. That's really it, right? So, Jennifer, to you, go ahead. Give us a little background. What is MassMutual, and what's your role there?
Thank you. And thank you for having me here today. So MassMutual is a financial services company based in Boston and Massachusetts, Springfield and New York, and a number of other offices. We are a financial services whole life, mainly protection products company, and very, very excited to talk about what we're doing with that today in a marketing sense. My role as a CMO is to run all of advertising, media, creative, an internal ad agency, external partners. I also focus on the customer research, insights, and all of the marketing functions for distribution and product. And I have the great pleasure of running our community responsibility and foundation programs as well.
Excellent. My goodness, that's a lot. You are covering an amazing spectrum of activities there. So Jennifer, it would be an understatement to say how much has actually happened over the past 2 years, right? I mean, you compare that with the years before that in marketing. What kind of changes have you noticed in fundamentally marketing is about audience, and it's about dealing with consumers and customers. And so with the behaviors that you have noticed and so forth evolve over especially the last 18 months, 2 years, what have you noticed? What changes have you noticed?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just been really crazy. I don't think anybody would undermine and say that the last 2 years, certainly coming out of a pandemic, haven't seen massive shifts in what our consumers are doing and how to engage with them. I think specifically what we've really been looking at is a couple of things. Some are shifts in the demographics of the population, and then some are shifts are in truly consumer behavior, because both of them have really impacted the way that we market and how we present ourselves in the industry. I think from a shift in population and demographics, we have seen a lot of long-term demographic trends that we think are going to continue to keep shifting, which have impacted consumer behavior, specifically as it relates to financial services and the need for the protection products that we offer. And the first of that is really right now around demographics. The current population is the oldest in U.S. history, and it's still aging. Those that make up over 40 years of age and older are at about 47% of the population today, compared to around 23% in 1990. Secondly is massive shifts around marital status. The rate of Americans who have considered themselves never married are at an all-time high. We're on 33% of the adult population right now, never getting married. Mm-hmm. And the third is around race and ethnicity. The current population is the most diverse in U.S. history, where we have over 40% of the population in this bracket, in this demographic age, and they're also a lot younger. So their cumulative lifetime spending projection is expected to be a lot greater than most average households. So that's just sort of like the profile of like the type of customers and the behavior and who we're looking at from a solutions perspective. I think we've also seen huge cultural and behavior shifts around digital expectations. And for sure, a lot of this comes from living in a socially distanced, accelerated world, has really increased the need for digital solutions and those expectations that consumers will retain those high digital expectations once we come out of the pandemic. And last, I think what's really important to us as an industry too is trust. But I think that's really critical for all brands. As social cohesion and institutional trust have really eroded over the last couple of years, consumer interest in brand activism and policy positioning has really spiked. And we've seen huge amount of the impact that consumer trust can have on tangible business and regulatory impacts.
Yeah, well, those are big trends that you're talking about at this point. And I think if you were to look forward, and I'm going to go in like two steps here, I'm looking at retrospectively so that we understand where you've been. Then we will go to sort of where you see the next year looking like, or the next 18 months, right? But the trends you talked about are actually here to stay for a while. I mean, we're talking about the next decade or two, or maybe more in terms of, so there is some degree of like, you can count on those trends to really be there and you can plan around it, which is nice, right? Mm-hmm. If you look at your own organization and your own marketing evolution that has happened in those last couple of years, 3 years, how have you changed?
Yeah, it's been interesting for sure. I think these the age and demographic shifts have really made us rethink the way that we look at our customer journeys and the way that we market to these customers to reach them at key purchasing points. Traditionally, I think within financial services companies for sure, and especially those of us in protection and life products, we used to follow what we saw were common life stages to trigger a purchase opportunity. So this is where the marketing messaging and the moment really focused on. And these would include things such as marriage, getting a first job, having children, and such like that. And with these population shifts, we've certainly started to see that has to move away from that. We have to move away from traditional events that we used to see people following and into things that we now call our sort of wake-up call. A wake-up call is certainly something that all of us have been through in the last 2 years for sure. But wake-up calls are when a neighbor or a relative or someone close to us has an event that was unexpected. And then it raises this recognition that we should be better protected, or we should be better saving for financial needs or insurance needs. And so that's really one of the things that we've started to really focus on and think differently about. And certainly the growing digital mindset. Our customers and their digital expectations made us shift our marketing approach too. I don't think this necessarily means that they tend to be, we're only focusing on millennials, because I don't think that's the only group that has this mindset right now. It doesn't mean that we have to look at our customers with being younger or having a different profile of needs, because our core product offering hasn't changed much in 100 years. But what has changed is the purchasing patterns and behaviors on how our customers want to work with us. And that's where we also have to shift the role of marketing as well. We use a digital always on approach right now. And where in the past, before I started at MassMutual, traditionally you would run campaigns that were social and they were 8 weeks in market, and then you'd shut it down and shift into something different. We really have to use digital at scale. And the opportunity for us to use it, leverage the key tools that we use as a brand, and then give them to the distribution and our advisors and our sales force, it helps them to scale, and they've become much more digitally engaged in social and digital marketing tools as well.
Excellent. Okay. So that's sort of what we are looking at, the rear view mirror, right? Let's look forward now. Okay. So I'm going to ask you in 4 stages here, because it's sort of the evolution of the way the marketing is played out, right? So let's start with media, the role of media. You already started going there. So the role of media, how is that going to evolve for you when you look at the coming year, coming 18 months, essentially, right? So the channels you've been using, or where the shifts might be, or where the major allocations might be, how are you going to look at that in the way you see that?
Yeah, no surprises here. I would say most of the consumers are much more attached to their screens than ever before living through a pandemic. This stay-at-home mandates really boosted the consumption of all types of media in multiple places. I remember reading by mid-September or the summer of 2020, consumers were spending an average of 53 hours a week on media, which was the fastest annual growth rate in 5 years. It's just crazy. And we all thought it was just our kids that was doing it, but everybody is now. And I think that digital will maintain this as the big winner, which we clearly saw in 2020 and 21 between social, audio, video, and streaming. There's no doubt, I think, that streaming media as a group was one of the biggest boomers and winners out of the pandemic.
Sure.
And we're watching that. And we see that there's going to be a lot more growth here, especially with video in 2022. So these will be key tools for us to build as we build our plans in 22. We're also spending time evaluating the growth in OTT and on demand, which I think will be really big movers next year, certainly related to subscription growth, but a lot around video on demand as well. SVOD, TVOD, AVOD, we're looking at all of these opportunities for video.
I think so. Jennifer, on that topic that you just mentioned, right? There are all these 4-letter words all over the place, right? The thing here is, when you look at subscription versus ad-supported video on demand, right? For the brand that you represent, I can see that AVOD would be of extreme relevance, because you're obviously embedding your messaging there and your advertising and so forth. What was the role that you would play in subscription video? Will there be any opportunity there?
Yeah, I don't think we've started to really dive into some of the components of that from a strategy perspective, and it might be working in some of our distribution partners' opportunities.
I see. Okay.
I think some of it, maybe more on TVOD, is what we're looking at. That works really well for live events and linear live streams. There's still people out there. We have these large groups of a distribution sales force that we traditionally used to get together for training or recognition, type of events. Where we'd go and spend 5 or 6 days together, and just a ton of content to bring them up to speed on the business and what's happening. And we can't now. People still aren't really completely there yet. So I think some of those opportunities are really extending into different places for us. But a lot to think about for sure. Figuring out how we can, change this. I think the biggest thing is we're in this radical reconsideration where more of us are really opening to changing our long-standing habits. And that includes brand loyalty and buying. And I think that's what's going to come out of the last 20 months. And that's what we really have to think about as we plan for media in 2022. It's not going to be the same things we used to always rely on.
Got it. So now I was going to go down the lane of asking you questions about branding versus performance media, right? But before I go there, because you've gone down this discussion of brand loyalty and how do you really create the connection, the absolute first question comes up is, what is the content? What are you focused on in terms of the way you tell the story of what MassMutual is? You notice I just asked you this question. I'm sure plenty of MassMutual products are relevant to me, by the way. But the fact of the matter is, I may not have really paid attention to that. And so the question is, what, first of all, are you doing to get that attention going, right? Before I go into the media side of it, let's talk about your message. Where are you evolving your message as a result of these changes in consumer behavior?
I think it really has to be, well, we rely a lot on data-driven, and we do a lot on content strategy. We use a lot of partners and a lot of content tools. And I think what you really have to figure out, if you're looking at it from a brand perspective, it really has to be around what's culturally relevant to people. We've run numbers of campaigns over the past 5 years that were really honing in on what was the most important and appropriate message in market today around cultural trends. When we're talking about products, I think it's really similar, and we are in a bit of a unique, although maybe to some quite unfortunate situation, where over the last 2 years, if you look at the life insurance and LIMRA results, life insurance sales are on a spike right now because of this recognition and what's happened with the pandemic. So when there's the opportunity for us to see that it's important to consumers in the market to talk about the products, that's where we really lean in to some of that messaging. But we really have to, we have a really cross-functional, big cross-functional team that looks at both the distribution channel needs, our product needs, and our customer and brand needs, and make sure that we are really tracking on data to put the appropriate message in the appropriate market.
Got it. So on that topic, now it makes more sense now to really focus on, this distinction that we have seen between, okay, how much real branding focused investment should be done versus how much performance, right? Given that it seems like most of your distribution is through the agent and the advisor channel, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So given that, how does that influence your choices in terms of, okay, should I be spending more money on branding and getting my message out there and building more awareness? Should I be doing more sort of performance and really getting the advisors and the tools in their hands? How do you make those choices in your business?
Well, I think it's a challenge that every one of us has, no matter where we are, in which industry we're in specifically. And I think for us, we're in a little bit of it's a little bit more of a complicated model because unlike some of our competitors, a lot of our advisors don't necessarily carry our brand. They could be, personally branded, or they work with other groups. So where does the role of the brand play for them? And that obviously means, how do we dictate and spend? I think the most consistent thing with our brand strategy when we are speaking about it is that we carry across multiple business units, and we serve as not just a distributor, but also a manufacturer. So we distribute a lot of MassMutual manufactured products on third-party platforms with partners. We also have a large institutional business, and we have a top 10 broker dealer. So we do a lot of wealth management as well. So when you think about what is the role of brand, it's not specifically in which channel does it support, but what are we supporting as an enterprise? And I think that's where the brand is important for us to generate that awareness, so that whenever you get to the point of sale, whatever the distributor is or whatever that sale is, that people have that concept and that good relationship and that good feeling with the brand. And I think that's where we've always gone to, making sure that people understand the strategy for the brand is different in that context, that it has to really drive at the point of sale for us. And that's not always as easy as it sounds, but it also plays a role of being really tactical and being in performance-driven marketing as well. So when we first when I started here 5 years ago, the strategy was, how do we relaunch a brand that was over 165 years old, that had, some awareness in the marketplace, but really needed to make sure that everybody understood what the strength of it was from a recognition and awareness part. What we have done over the past number of years has rose those numbers to a point where the consideration numbers are shifting really high as well. And that's what makes us start to shift into using the brand as a performance and growth role, which we've been doing a lot of over the last 12 to 24 months. So to get to this point, we spent the past year or so building a proprietary media model system where you can, working with our data science teams and our technology teams, really understanding how to get real-time attribution and optimization against the media. It's amazing to see the range of options that we can get into using our different distribution channels, and certainly with the innovations of video and podcast and streaming and audio and others. But I think that the real essence here is, when we have such a large enterprise brand, the brand isn't necessarily the product, it's the value of what we have as a company and what we believe in the principles. And then you mix that with the ability to come down the funnel and make sure that you're using different channels to make the performance marketing work harder, drive direct engagement, and generate real data for us. So we really have the full understanding of the role that each media channel plays, and then how do we use it when we want to be talking brand messaging versus really distinct performance and growth marketing.
Got it. No, I think you contextualized it really well. And I think you put it in a cycle where you have started with all the branding related efforts to drive up the awareness levels, which is very clear if I got that right.
Mhm.
And now it makes sense, obviously, to move people down into the journey somewhere in the consideration set, continuing to keep the brand top of mind, of course, right? And then so that when consumers go to a particular agent or a particular distribution outlet, they explicitly ask for it.
Yes.
And I think that's really how you're trying to create the pull
Yes.
into the marketing, and potentially you are doing the same thing on the push side of it, so
Right.
that at the same sort of intersection point, something good happens, which drives, profitable behaviors for you. So I get that. So that's very, very helpful. Thank you for explaining it that way. So when we look at 2022 now, right? For you, does this trend continue? And the question for me here in particular is, where are the specific channels where you are beginning to see more traction? Let me give you a little cue here. I mean, this is not as open-ended a question as it sounded. There has been a lot of talk about contextual advertising, where because we have limited access to potentially cookies, third-party data, whatever, perhaps meeting people in the moment, in context, especially given the emergence of machine learning and AI, and it's getting so sophisticated that you can literally tell what people are watching right now, what part of the video they're looking at or content they're looking at, or what part of the page or the message they're reading. Are you seeing a role fitting in there somewhere as you look at sort of the role of media as it evolves with this level of sophistication? Does that change your consideration as to looking at media in a more in context way, in the moment way? How do you see that?
I think it has to be there. And I think especially if you're looking at living in this digital space, that's really what the point and purpose and people expect are. So, we've done a lot of work with, really tracking through video, tracking through digital in real time context, and retargeting and moving people across different channels. And that's a lot of what I think the challenge is, because when you're really focusing on the customer journey, it's bouncing all over the place on you at a rapid pace right now. And that's where what we've really looked at is making sure that we're not, intruding or interrupting, because we also are not ultimately, which I think is the significant value of digital, we're ultimately not sending you to purchase. It's not direct to consumer direction with what we're doing, but we're trying to make sure that you are acting on something that's valuable and relevant, where we sort of earn that right to interrupt whatever that experience, the video or, the social or the context is. So I think it's really important to make sure that the way we create that is in appropriate sort of, engaging and maybe not long stream for some cases, but more snappable, digestible, small pieces to just show up to people where we're reminding them, but not intruding. And I think that's really the challenge. We constantly have a lot of conversations on the shift and focus of what digital is for us in our media spend. And it works really well for direct to consumer or retail type of products. For us, it's really about making sure that we're adding value and staying top of mind. And the most we can do is drive you to the reference to find an advisor or learn more or engage with the learning tool or figure out something about your finances. It's a really different way, a place to play without being, interrupting people, I think is
understood. No, that's amazing clarification. Thank you for doing that. I now get it, right? So the way you've made a reference to the customer journey at least 2 or 3 times already. So let me work off of that particular topic. When you look at the journey from the time when you are looking at moments where it's relevant to bring the mass mutual, the brand message, right? And bringing them to consideration, thinking about it, connecting them with their life and what they're doing and so forth. And you look at all the touch points going all the way to the place where you don't really have much control. They're going to go and buy whatever they're going to buy, and they're going to make that decision at that point, as you pointed out, right? But if you look at that entire journey, where are the biggest friction points for you right now? where you might focus more energies next year?
It's funny. I think that we spend a lot of time on this topic because again, really understanding where we fit in the role of the funnel and when we can sort of like step in or step out, as we were saying. And I think the friction point for us is always the same. Everybody wants a seamless, personalized experience. When we move across so many channels, it's hard for brands to make them connected in a consistent way in the back end. And we know that ultimately that's going to break. And when you create the break in the experience, you create the friction. And when they hit that block in the purchasing journey, it ruins the experience and ultimately the sale. So I think what's important for us, and it depends on what the journey is and what the path that we're sending them through. For us, it's really not necessarily one consistent friction point, but it's really the challenge to know that if you don't have it connected on the back end with the technology and the analytics to know exactly where that happened, you're really never going to get ahead of that issue. I mean, there's no one common place that we find we break in the experience funnel, because the reason that we have the analytics and journey orchestration plans are to optimize the journeys and then go back and fix it. So I think it tends to be in places where we really move into more of the newer technologies, I think, where people find that you really can't get that connection on the back end. And when you really have an experience that isn't ultimately directed at the right customer to begin with. I think there's lots of great conversation around shoppable media, which we don't necessarily engage in because our primary distribution partner is the advisor. But for D2C companies, I think it's a powerful tool. I also think shoppable media is a great way to reduce friction because it drives you right to the purchase, but it's also in a much more wider range of experiences to present. I think it's a brilliant creative tool because you could be posting, imagery and photos, in Instagram and video things. And it's in the moment, and it's amazing for different purchasing behaviors. And I think that's really the key where you can understand where the friction hits. What is the behavior they're coming in? Emotional or impulsive purchases, last minute shoppers. That's something where I think shoppable moments really works well because you've got somebody in that moment and they're going to react to it. If you're trying to bring them through an education of what the product is or a bigger, longer journey, and you're going to try to get them across multiple touch points of education or customer service, then that friction point could be really different.
Yes. Thank you for clarifying that. That is so true. I think it's all about consideration part of it, right? Because I think you're in a category where people think a lot, right?
Right.
It's not something they just immediately say, oh, wow, of course, I'm going to buy this life insurance or my long-term care plan or whatever, right? I mean, it's something that you just kind of mulling over for a while. You're looking at the things and so forth, and it could take, I don't know how long it takes. I mean, there are some statistics that we are lucky if we make one big financial decision in a year.
Right.
But that's a tough thing for you because you really have to stay there with them for a while before a decision is going to be made, right?
The brand has to stay there. So what we were saying earlier, that's what the brand recognition and awareness is important for. But for the ultimate decision to be made, some advisors could spend 8 months trying to really go through a comprehensive plan with somebody to figure out what the best decisions are for them. And the decisions to make an investment in these type of products comes from a lot of different places. It comes from peers, it comes from friends, it comes from education. It depends on what the consumer's behavior is. So as long as we can stay top of mind while they're still mulling over, or we can add value in helping them with that decision, understanding why it's the right fit for them, or at a minimum, really appreciating and understanding as a brand, they would want to be with us. I always say that consumers brand, we buy from brands that we love, and everything else we just shop on Amazon. If you need it tomorrow, you just go to Amazon. But if you want something that you love, whatever it is, if it's your favorite clothing or it's a favorite, accessory or something, it's a car, it's really the kind of thing that you've taken the time to care about and you want to know. And that's where I think our, master brand is really important to keep that top of mind and make sure that stays relevant to them.
That's an amazing, simple cue that you just provided, which is the distinction between something you really, really care about and you really love and you like and you want to go get it the way you want it versus go shop in the marketplace somewhere, right? Just get it, right? That's a really very clear distinction. I love that. As you're talking about trust, and the trust comes from so many different places, have you leveraged some celebrity influencer kind of connections and things like that as a way to establish trust, or is that not relevant within the category where you operate?
I think our trust really comes for our customers. The trust and value comes in the history and the heritage and the strength of the company, and doing the right thing. So for us, I think what we really leverage is the values that we have, the position that we have around diversity and inclusion, the consistency that we have to sustainability, all of the things that really make people say, I trust that company because I care about them. And for financial services, trust really is around stability and strength in performance. And so that's your history and your heritage. We have a lot of different sponsor opportunities that we work with different partners in the industry, and even, just sort of partners, but they're really more for consumers to engage with, for us to find common audiences and preferences and passions as a brand. But we haven't ever really leveraged, I think our industry leaders and the market is what, and our performance and how we do it there is really what builds people's trust. And also the fact that, we've been around for 170 years and we've never not paid out a life insurance policy. We consider ourselves a company that keeps its promise. And whenever you need something from us, from any kind of a claim or a payout, we pride ourselves on the trust to make sure that they know you'll get it as quickly as possible too.
Fantastic. So you are leading us to this whole topic of trust. We understand in your category in financial services, clearly the fundamental pillars of trust are what you described, the way you described it, stability, consistency, and all the things that MassMutual does. On that topic, this whole idea of consumer privacy, consent, and this whole topic has to have amazing relevance for a trusted brand like MassMutual. Where do you stand on that? And what are you thinking about as you see going out? Because obviously, amazing sensitivity is there, and for all the right reasons. Remember, Jennifer, I will remind you of the 22 years ago, when we were together there at Digitas. Remember those days when the do not call list was actually out?
Yes.
And it absolutely destroyed the outbound telecommunications marketing, right?
Yeah.
It would be smart if we didn't learn any lessons. Hopefully we learned some lessons from there, that if you're not careful and if you don't have a trusted relationship with the consumer, the channel just will not exist for very long, right?
Exactly.
So we just have to be extremely cautious and very careful about the way we tread this forward. And for digital advertising to be robust, obviously, I don't need to complete the sentence. How do you see it, and where do you see this evolving for MassMutual next year?
I think we're always going to be in a bit of a unique situation because we operate in a heavily regulated industry. We're a mutual company, which means that everybody that is a policy owner is an owner. And so data privacy is always going to be a top priority for us. We have a data governance and data security teams that have rule specific policies and procedures that ensure that we are all focused on protection, and that includes any type of data. So for us, the evolution is looking really at that frontline security, whether it's personal data or what's the appropriate data that we could be using for a capture perspective. When it breaks into marketing, I think it's really looking at being really careful with the data that we have for prospecting and cross-sell. And that's where really the elements of precision marketing and personalization have to be coming in, and they have to be relevant. If you consider the fact that we could potentially know so much about somebody as an existing customer, down to the details of their financial profile, and every family member that I have, why we would not hold the same responsibility to have the right detail to know what message is appropriate for them. And that's really where it has to be really specific. So we tend to do a lot of modeling. We work with a lot of different data science opportunities. We just dedicate a team of people to really looking at the research to stay on top of our customers' evolving needs, look at the deliverable target audiences that we could, and again, really using advanced analytics to mine customer data so we can really understand the right needs. Sort of that trade-off where you sort of say, well, good thing for you, you have all this information on them. But on the other hand, bad thing for us if we don't get them the right message because we have all this information on them. And I think the value there is the trust to give somebody more data about yourselves is really in the value exchange. I'll give you everything you need to know about me if you're going to give me something that I think is important and relevant to me. And so that's where we're constantly evolving and making sure that we have the sort of that burden of trust and confidence, but also the burden of knowledge to make sure that we're really using analytics and data to make sure that the personalization is appropriate.
Excellent. Jennifer, we are in the last 5 minutes at this point. As you can tell, time flies by really fast here, right? When we are in a conversation like this. Let's talk about one thing now that you have, one or two things, your favorite things that you have done and you've learned from that over the last year, 2 years, what have you, right? That you're proud of, and it's something that would be of relevance to marketers across the board, right? Talk about something like that so that when marketers hear about it, they can do something and factor that into what they will do next year. Okay, so just connect the dots here. What are you proud of? What did you felt was like, wow, this is something that we did. We were so proud, so excited, learned some things, could be good, could be bad, doesn't really matter. It's either way, it's learning, right? Whether it's worked or didn't work, doesn't really matter.
I would say actually, maybe I'm sort of the eternal optimist, but I would say maybe something good that came out of the past 2 years of us working under a pandemic I was so proud of the fact that we worked in an environment where we were moving at just a rapid pace of uncertainty. And we gave ourselves the freedom to make really good decisions and follow our heart on them. We relied on each other. I mean, we were shifting messages in market every week. And then when you think about what happened with the pandemic and what consumer sentiment was, we really learned that you can say that the consumers drive it until you live in an environment where you don't have a choice. We're all sitting in our homes and we can't figure out how to move anything. You have to follow what people are saying and feeling and thinking and making sure that you're staying on top of that. So with consumer sentiment changing on a daily basis, then moving into a period of time where we were only living through crisis around our health and our communities, but crisis at a national level around social issues, we were constantly flying to keep up. And I think we were so good at keeping that message straight because you stick with your true north of what you stand for as a brand. And that's what we made decisions on. I think it was a combination of making sure that you always trust your instincts and are willing to move quickly, because we don't get to decide how quickly our consumers are going to change their mind on anything that has to do with us or what's happening in their world. And I'm really proud of the fact that even though it was probably one of the most hectic and uncertain and crazy times for us as marketers, we learned so much. And I think my team and all of us and a lot of us in the industry were able to be, front and center of what mattered. And as marketers, a lot of great brands out there just never lost their eye or their ability to move quickly and trust where their heart was, as long as they followed where their consumer was. And you have to know that. You have to know your consumer, and then you have to trust your team to make the right call. So I think that's probably one of the most exciting things that I've been through in the past couple of years here.
That says two things to me, Jennifer. One is the fact that, yes, of course, you are very data-driven as a company, right? And so you're obviously staying on the pulse of the consumer, but there is a second part to that. You have a very robust organization behind you to be able to respond so quickly because, tons of data is out there, of course, to be able to act on it. That's a whole different story, right? How do you prepare yourself and how you align yourself and do all of those things? So obviously, a lot of credit to you. We have 2 minutes. I'm going to ask you one question, because it just has to be asked. There is so much conversation about NFTs and cryptocurrencies and a variety of other things that are emerging, and they're becoming really hot topics. And if I didn't ask, somebody's going to say, why didn't we address that question with Jennifer, who's so experienced, right? Tell me, is there some relevance of NFTs and cryptocurrencies into your business right now? Or is that something you're just kind of thinking about and might do something? Is the next year the year?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both, I would say, for sure. Crypto is definitely an innovative and shifting opportunity in our industry. So from a product perspective, we've done some really interesting stuff with it. We've made some product innovation moves And because we really do believe that crypto is increasingly becoming a part of the financial landscape. It was just about this time last year that we made an investment of 100 million in Bitcoin for our general investment account. And we're working on a ton of initiatives to better serve all of our clients and our financial professionals to allow them to better offer qualifying clients access to this fund and an alternative and efficient way to invest in Bitcoin. So from a marketing perspective, really building around that messaging, showing the opportunity to support the business and distribution teams. It's a differentiator in the industry, I think, for sure. We're also looking at the value chain connection for an NFT strategy. Again, given the challenge that we work in a distribution channel that's B2B to C ultimately. But I think that there's huge opportunity for retail and direct to consumer brands that I follow closely that have really done an amazing job experimenting with it. I think, brands like Taco Bell and their Swivel Taco, McDonald's.
Sure, of course.
I mean, just crazy stuff. And I think, one of the brilliant examples is even with Campbell's Soup, where here's a brand that's trying to find a way to use this platform to reinvent their brand, a core brand element, the soup label, and present something that's modern and really innovative. And I think NTFs work really well when you want to appeal to this different generation of consumers and really understand how to relate and connect with them. So I think for some of the other different type of purchasing brands and retail brands, it's just a fascinating space for me. I think, as an investment opportunity, of course, we love Bitcoin. We think that crypto is amazing, and we're doing it in the most responsible way for our distribution channels. But NFTs, I think it's just going to be amazing and fun to see where we can take these integrated experiences with this type of technology.
Yes, Jennifer, it was a real delight for me to talk with you this morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Passing it back to Brand Innovators. Did we do it all right? Did we make it on time?
Yeah, you did. Great. What a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much, Jennifer and Suraj. Jennifer, I love how you clearly identified the population shifts that are happening when we first started this session, so true, and how diverse the population is now, and that we really need to be looking at more non-traditional life moments. Those wake-up calls you mentioned, I love that you put them that way. It really kind of helps the marketers focus a little bit more on what's important to that marketplace. And then also I was loving where this discussion was going with NFTs and crypto. I'm so interested to see where the industry and marketers are going now with these new technologies. Very cool. So wonderful insights throughout. Thank you so much for sharing. We really appreciate your time today, Suraj and Jennifer. Thank you so much for being here.
All righty.
Thank you for having us.
Have a good day. Bye now.
We'll let you go. Bye-bye. Next up, we're really looking forward to hearing from Tia Cummings Hopkins, the SVP Global Brand Marketing for Square. And also we'll have Beth Ann Kaminkow, Global CEO at VMLY&R Commerce, to lead our discussion. We'll give them a moment to join. Hi, Tia. Hi, Beth Ann.
Hi, I'm just trying to get my video set
Hi,
up.
how are you guys?
Hi, Andrea.
Hi,
Good.
Thanks for joining us. I'm really looking forward to this session. I already introduced you guys to the audience, so what I will do is go ahead and hand it over to you, Beth Ann, to get us started with the discussion with Tia. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you. I want to actually start by thanking Brand Innovators, because I think this is sort of the last session of the year. I'm not sure for all your programming, but certainly for anything that I'm involved in. And it's just been a wonderful year of content and just great opportunities to, raise the conversations that we should be having in our industry and profile just some incredible people. So I just wanted to start off by thanking you for that, and then move it over to Tia, the wonderful person that I get to have a conversation with today. And tee that up in terms of, getting your perspective on the predictions and what we see ahead for 2022. Obviously some big topic areas when we look into what's changing in leadership, in marketing and innovation, and of course in commerce, something that's near and dear to both of our focus today. But before I get into that, Tia, let me try to do justice to who you are and your background. So, as Andrea said, I'm joined by Tia Cummings. I think your name is Tia Cummings Webster, your full name, or maybe it's the other way around. But incredible background. You're Atlanta-based, and have been an award-winning marketer. 15 years of experience across a different sectors, but mostly for Fortune 500 companies like United Technologies, Johnson & Johnson, L'Oreal, Kellogg's, and the Intercontinental Hospital Group or Hotels Group, prior to joining Square, which is what brings us to the conversation today. Tia attended Hampton University as president scholar and earned a BS in chemical engineering. We're going to find out how that is related to the world that you live in today. And after that, she got an MBA from the Krannert School of Management at Purdue University, where she was a business opportunity program fellow. So quite inspiring background, Tia, and just preparing for this, listening to your viewpoints on these different topics was super interesting, and so much that I want to learn more about. And I'm sure now a chance for everybody to hear some of your perspectives. So let's get first into the topic of leadership. The last, really more than a year, I guess, if we're counting, it's been about 18 months since the beginning of the pandemic anyway. And already as we looked at a new decade and reaching 2020, we were thinking that there would be some types of leadership transformation, just, looking at the beginning of a new decade and the things that were changing in the world and in our businesses, not obviously foreshadowing what was about to come. And now, of course, we've had these dramatic forces at play and at work, literally changing how we work with our own organizations, with the other companies that we serve, and with the consumers that we serve. So it's really tested all of us as leaders. And you have a reputation of being an incredible leader of teams, of business, and the businesses that you serve. So I would love for you to get into that first. Like, what have you learned during this time? And what does that give you in terms of insight into what has to continue to change? And how are you thinking about leading differently as you go into 2022?
Yeah, I mean, right. So much has changed the last 2 years. And, I've always considered myself an empathetic and human-centered leader, but I think those skills have become even more important since COVID. When you think about how drastically people's lives have changed in so many ways, right? Whether it's picking up a job now as a full-time educator as for their kids on top of, their day job, dealing with the separation from family and friends, or even the loss of family and friends, So I think if the last almost 2 years have taught me anything, it's that work is not and should not be the number one priority in people's lives. And so when you approach it from that perspective as a leader, if, hey, work is no longer the most important thing, that really means I've shifted in how I'm leading my teams, right? So now it's all about encouraging them to take care of themselves and their families first, no matter what that means and whatever that looks like for them. I spend a lot more time checking in on my people than I did in the past. Every week, how are you doing? What are you, what can I do to support you? I think I'd always kind of believed that work will work itself out, but I think myself and a lot of other people lost sight of that until COVID kind of really reminded us and forced us to slow down and, think about our priorities in life. And so, I just learned to extend a lot of grace to people, right? Because I know everyone is really just doing the best that they can. And then I think the other thing that's really changed is I spend a lot more time thinking about ways to motivate my team and help them feel connected when we are 100% remote. That is really, really hard. It's a lot easier when you're in an office and engaging with people on a day-to-day basis, but you really got to get creative. People have video conference fatigue. There's only so many Zoom parties, you can do. So, it takes a lot of work to really find new ways to make those things fun and engaging.
Yeah, it strikes me. One of the things that we've been thinking a lot about is when you are operating from home and your schedule is back to back, it ends up creating a very transactional relationship with those that we work with our employees, and even in some ways our clients. And so it's like, how do you develop that emotional engagement or the serendipity and spontaneity that happens, even just that kind of fun connection that takes place when you're physically together? And, I think it's super difficult. And even when we start to move more into hybrid workflows, I think it still could be difficult because, the time is going to be so scheduled when you're together and so programmed that we're not leaving a lot of breathing room and space. And it's just very hard to create that as a leader. So it's interesting to hear how you're thinking about that and trying to address it.
Yeah. And I don't have the silver bullet. I'm still trying to figure it out, right? I'll be fully transparent because I'm still getting feedback like, hey, want to feel more connected to the team, want to know what everyone's doing. And so, it's a lot of test and learn, and well, let's try this and let's try this. We'll figure it out. It's something that we'll get used to, but yeah, it's tough.
I think it's also interesting when you think about, like, we've talked the idea of customer centricity for so long. And I think we're moving into a time in the workforce where it's about employee centricity. Yeah. And just like companies who talked client centric or customer centricity and didn't really organize the business around what that meant to deliver against that promise, I think we're finding and facing the same thing right now as businesses. Like, what does it really mean to truly be employee centric and put their needs and the understanding and how we, inform the understanding that we need to deliver against that differently.
I mean, the Great Resignation is real, right? People are realizing they have options and they're really rethinking their life's priorities. And so it does put the onus on us as employers and leaders to make them want to stay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, these are interesting times. We'll have to check back in and see how, we're both on both sides we're doing on that one. So when we think about 2022, obviously the imperative around innovation becomes even more important. I think when you look at this past year, while innovation probably has started in a lot of companies, there's also been a lot of just protection of the main business, a lot of, how do we maintain to sustain and to, sort of survive maybe another day, depending upon what business you're in or the businesses that you work with. I'd love to hear your thoughts there too, on like kind of striking that balance of either protecting the core and then thinking about where future growth is going to come from. How do you convince an organization that it's sort of time to build the confidence around moving to things that are going to drive innovation? How are you all doing that in your organization?
Yeah. So number one, I think innovation has to be a priority. Especially as we're coming out of the pandemic, just so much has changed from the way we work to the way our businesses are run to the way consumers are shopping and engaging with brands. So I think you'd be hard pressed to try to return to business as usual when the usual itself has shifted. And I think that brands and businesses who fail to innovate in their messaging across their products or services and in their marketing activities are going to be left behind by the ones who are innovating. For Square specifically, we're always looking to meet the needs of our customers, across the globe so we can help them start, run, grow their businesses, no matter the size, complexity, or industry, right? That's the party line. And we know that since consumer expectations have changed so much because of the pandemic, business owners have to, really tell us what they need to do so that they can better deliver consumers. And in turn, then we can better help those business owners. So what does that look like? We've had to innovate on our product offerings to account for a lot of these new consumer behaviors, like QR code usage for tableside ordering when you're at restaurants. Payments through digital wallets or peer-to-peer, and even this, the whole buy now, pay later growth that's happening. So, we also have to innovate in our marketing approach. So yes, we'll continue to do all of our messaging around our capabilities, our products, all of that functional stuff to educate business owners on how we can help them. But, we're also really leaning more into our brand purpose so that we can connect on an emotional level. We have to remember, and I tell this to my team all the time, people are like, oh, we're marketing to businesses. It's like, we're marketing to people who own businesses. And so we have to remember that, right? And not just think of them in a functional manner. And so when we talk about our purpose being economic empowerment for all, we're really thinking about, okay, how do we bring that to life in new and innovative ways? So, when we say we're empowering all, how do we make sure that we're including all communities, including the underserved, like African Americans and Hispanics, who've historically struggled with access and support to start businesses. So, those are some of the things that we're thinking about in 2022. It's a mix of both product innovation to account for all of these consumer behavior changes, as well as messaging changes to account for the way people are thinking and feeling.
Can you talk a little bit about like the model or methodology that you use for some of that innovation? Is there like a test and learn philosophy and a culture of experimentation that happens? Or is it a bit of like sitting in a room, just knowing instinctually and based on your data what has to be done, and then you kind of go big behind it? How does that work?
It's got to be both, right? There's an art and a science to it. So we absolutely are data driven, right? We love to do research and dig into insights to learn from, our business owners and what they can tell us, digging into the competitive landscape, mounds of research and data. But there's also have to be, you trust your gut, and we like to experiment 100%. We are a culture of test and learn and experimentation. We have budgets set aside so we can do that and say, hey, let's try this. Let's put this out there in a small scale and see how it works. So we are big into doing that to help figure out, okay, what worked, and then we can put more investment and more support behind it. So it's a balance of both, right? I don't think you should lean one way or another 100%, because, data is data, but, there's a reason why we do the jobs, right? And you have to allow for that human instinct and that gut as well.
So linking this now to the question before about like sort of the human capital elements of our jobs, do you find that having a strong innovation culture and agenda helps in the dynamic with employees and sort of there's a bit of an employee payback in terms of how they, feel engaged and get excited behind what the company's mission and purpose is?
100%, right? I think that, at Square, we're very fortunate because of our culture and the way we do business. People like to stay here because they feel they can try new things. They feel it's entrepreneurial. They can test. And if something doesn't work out or, it's okay. It's like, great. Well, we learned something, on to the next. And I think people thrive and really like those types of cultures as opposed to ones where they don't feel they can do that. And so we're lucky, right? We've got a really good stroke of sort of retaining our talent and recruiting new talent. So I definitely think that having that type of culture helps us as it relates to our employee engagement.
And talk a little bit more too about the B2B audience piece that the point you make is a great one. And anyone who's been in B2B marketing knows, like, you have to keep reminding yourself that this is, a human like ourselves on the other side. It's not that different from, a consumer messaging, conversation. The more human actually that you can make it, and the more you can trigger those things that recognize that person in a holistic way, that sort of the better, I think, and more effective the communication is. But are there things that are shifting and changing, whether that's because of the sort of pandemic force that has occurred, or as you just looked to 2022, that is different about how you're marketing to that audience nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, business owners always had challenges, right? Starting a business, running a business is not easy. And then you layer onto that with all of the additional challenges that they're now facing because of the pandemic, right? So for example, it was always hard to run a business. It's harder now because a lot of businesses are struggling to find talent, right? There's a lot of for hire signs out there. So how do you help these business owners when the amount of things that they're worried about has doubled or tripled? And we have to keep that in mind, right? So it would be very insensitive of us to sort of, we're going out with all this regular functional messaging and completely, disregarding some of the emotions that they're dealing and the challenges that they're facing. We have to talk about that. We have to acknowledge that. And so I do think that there's been a shift, right? And sort of ensuring that we show up as saying, we understand, owning a business has always been challenging. And now it's more challenging because of all of these new things that COVID has brought on. And we're addressing those challenges too, right? And so that's why I said innovation is so required, because so much has changed. Like, if we were still just doing business the way we had done before, I don't think we'd be growing the way that we were able to grow throughout the pandemic. So it's a really interesting nuance, especially for someone like me who's, spent most of her career in traditional consumer marketing, to sort of understand that, no, these are people who've got a lot more on their plate. They're responsible for other people's livelihoods, right? They've got employees and thinking through that. So We really have to, I think, be more sensitive to that and take that human approach.
Really interesting. And I love to see how these things are evolving. So now a topic, obviously, that's core to both of our businesses, commerce. And we have begun to get into this conversation a little bit as you think about like all of the innovation taking place in commerce today. And if you think about that B2B consumer journey, or even the end consumer journey, and how it's shifted in the last year with technology, and our own behaviors have just changed so dramatically. And your business is really at the heart of those solutions and how you design for that. And you think about the consumer journey has so many touch points. I'm sure if our budgets were endless, we could really try to cover them all, but there's just not enough time or money for that. So how are you prioritizing the commerce evolution, and what is can you give us a little bit of a sneak peek at what are some of the priorities in your 2022 agenda?
Yeah, so you kind of hit on it, right? Like, this commerce landscape is constantly evolving, and the way that people are shopping, selling, paying, and getting paid changed even more rapidly during the pandemic. And so what we're seeing is that a lot of these changes are here to stay. And as long as we understand them and understand them better, and any company really that understands these changes are here to stay, they're the ones who are going to reap the benefits, right? So increasing sales, customer engagement, loyalty, all of those things. So for example, when we think about now, because of the pandemic, many people are used to doing their shopping and buying on a variety of different channels, and they really want to see that experience continue. So they could be browsing and buying something online and then going to pick it up in store. Or they bought something via text message and then they want to return it in store. Or they're booking their hair appointments via social media, or ordering food from an app and then stopping by for curbside pickup while their kids are in the car. So, so much is changing. Square just released our Future of Commerce report on December 8th. So anyone can go look at it. You go to our town square on our website and you can see there's just a wealth of information in there. And so I'll share a few statistics that we're seeing as it relates to omni-channel commerce. For the beauty channel, or the beauty industry specifically, 25% of Gen Z consumers and 27% of Gen X consumers are interested in shopping through chat or text messages. And then 43% of millennials and Gen Z consumers say that they bought products through a text message for beauty or personal care businesses. So just this desire for omni-channel convenience is not just in how they're shopping and buying, but in how they expect to pay. So we're seeing younger consumers really jump onto that buy now, pay later movement. And you can see it in the growth of, this whole space with players like Affirm and Afterpay and Klarna. And then you see these younger consumers are moving to contactless options like peer-to-peer and mobile wallet apps. So, here's another stat from our Future of Commerce report. This one's related to the retail industry. 21% of Gen Z consumers prefer paying through mobile wallet apps. And that's right underneath the 24% within that same age group who prefer traditional card payments. So you're seeing peer-to-peer and mobile wallets are, catching up to people who want to pay with cards. And so when you really think about, how to win in this new landscape, what we're thinking about is we've got to continue offering new ways and more ways for consumers to shop and pay so we can meet those expectations. And so that means, as a provider to businesses who are providing these services to the end consumer, we have to make sure our products are integrated with all these different ways to shop and pay.
It's just phenomenal to think about the evolution that's going on right now. And I guess not surprising. Like, if you think about, we've seen the digital natives now come of age, and now we're getting the mobile natives much more with buying power. And, it's second nature to them. Like, I just can't think of, when I think about that age group and people that I know, anyone that's really focused on carrying a wallet as much as the phone is just the center of their lives. So how much are you looking at China and parts of the world like that are so far out ahead and some of these consumer behaviors to get a sense and indication of where your product innovation pipeline needs to be?
Yeah, Square is really focused on, international expansion. We continue to grow and launch around the world. This year we launched in Ireland and France. Next year we'll be launching in additional countries. I can't share just yet. But absolutely, right? What that means is as we're preparing for our international expansion, there's a lot of on the ground work and research that happens to ensure that we've got the right product experiences and product offerings to succeed in those markets.
Yep. The payment elements of the change that's taking place is just phenomenal again. And it's the creativity being applied to it as well, that, there's a convergence of sort of content with the actual commerce and transaction moment as well, which is something that we're focused on, but it just opens up so many possibilities. It's going to be interesting to see in 2022, really how dramatically this space continues to shift and shape.
Absolutely. And I think that we are well set up for success as we continue to grow. And you think about, all the other brands in our portfolio and how we're integrating them across the board. It's going to be really exciting for us.
So we saw purpose emerge this past year as, a very strong focus for companies, whether it was in the sustainability space or just purpose-driven brands, I think with more meaning and more impact and influence than ever before. So I'd love to talk to you and get your perspectives a bit on like what made it different this year that, has compelled brands to think about it differently, to, put money behind it and budget behind it. And are there, companies that you admire that did it, exceedingly well? And you don't have to name companies that didn't, but, ways that you all thought about, like, where are the boundaries and the guardrails to get it right?
Yeah. It's interesting to me, right? I think there are brands who have been in the purpose game for years. All right. And they do a really great job of integrating it into everything they do. Brands like, Procter and Gamble within their portfolio, Ben and Jerry's, REI, Tom's, like awesome. But then what we've seen over the last 2 years is you've got many companies who kind of use the pandemic as an opportunity, to lean into purpose, like 3M and Clorox. And I think that's great too, right? In my last role at Walker & Company, we knew that our target audience of Black men was severely impacted by the pandemic and the fight for racial justice. So we launched several initiatives to support them, all right, including a partnership with Headspace to offer free mental health resources. And it had a huge impact on our business. Square, during the height of pandemic, really focused on how can we support these small businesses and local communities who are going through a tough time, like I mentioned before. And so, we waived all of our software subscription fees and offered, loans so these businesses could stay open. What we know now, right, and what we've been talking a lot about is how customers are going out of their way to shop with brands that align with their values and are making a difference, right? There was some recent research that shows up to 81% of customers will do that. Mm-hmm. And 42% of millennials said they started or grew a relationship with a brand based on its social impact. And so, consumers are really using their buying power to make these companies act. And so what that means is that being purpose-driven is not a temporary thing. It's not just for show. This is here to stay. And so it really needs to be in your brand's DNA if you're going to be successful at creating that loyal community. And if you haven't realized that yet, then you're really behind. And so when we think about how do you do that in 2022, to me, it always starts with understanding your consumer or your customer extremely well, better than anyone else. What is it that's impacting them? How can your brand offer these meaningful and relevant solutions that are really going to add value to their lives? And then the other caveat I love to say you have to watch out is like anything else that becomes a trend, and being purpose-driven brand is a trend right now. Lots of brands are going to be jumping onto this purpose bandwagon, and you've got to be careful because if it comes across as performative or disingenuous, your customers are going to see right through you, and that's actually going to hurt you. So you mentioned, I'm not going to call out any names of brands who may have done that and how it's come back to hurt them. We all know, we've seen them. But I feel very strongly that, like I said, there were brands who'd been doing this purpose-driven work for years. And now you've had a bunch of brands who jumped on since 2020, which is great. And I think this is not something that's going to just sort of fall off. Even if we come to be beyond COVID one day, if there's no more variance, I still think being purpose driven is just something that's now inherent because, when you think about this younger generation, they're really, really focused on that. And so I think all brands really need to spend some time thinking about, what is your purpose? What can you uniquely offer to your consumers that are going to add value to their lives? And how do you tie what you stand for to what consumers care about? I just think it's going to be critical. And the brands who, nail that and find ways to do that authentically in everything they do are the brands who are going to win.
Wholeheartedly agree. And I will call out one recent example, which is Chanel Beauty, who launched, kind of a gift set, if you will, for the holidays. And it became a massive TikTok backlash overnight because the perceived sense of value, and this wasn't even just about purpose driven, but it was just about commercialism and going a bit too far. And doing something, especially over the holidays, it was supposed to be kind of more of a give back to people who are loyal customers, and then ends up not in reality having kind of the real quality and value behind it, which is what the brand stands for in so many elements. It is interesting how quickly now the consumers are going to hold brands accountable. So it is so important to get it right. And, you mentioned a very strong sense of purpose at Square. Was that something that has been there from the beginning, or is that something that has evolved and strengthened and deepened, or was that sort of the sentiment from the very beginning and now it's just been a commitment to keep paying that off?
Yeah, we're fortunate, right? We were a purpose founded brand. When you think about why Square came to be, it was because one of our co-founders was basically selling art, at like festivals, farmers market kind of thing, and had no way to accept credit card payments. And the only way you could do that, back in like 2008, 2009, the only way you could do that is you partner either with a big bank and you pay these expensive fees. And that's just not, sustainable when you're a small business. And so that's why Square was born. It's like, you know what? Everyone should have access, to the economy and be able to, make money and sell and accept payments in all kinds of ways and not be limited because they can't afford it. And so when you're founded on this premise of economic empowerment for all, it's really easy to carry that through. And I think we've done a really great job as a company of staying true to that and really thinking about, okay, how do we continue to bring that to life? So, I get that that's not the case for all companies and all brands. They weren't all founded on a purpose, or at least a purpose that's as powerful and meaningful. But I think if you do some digging, a lot of these companies may find that actually there was a purpose. And how do you make it relevant in 2022?
Yeah, really good point. So I want to invite the audience to join me here. If you have questions, please, if Tia obviously is sitting on a bunch of data and is a wealth of experience. So please feel free to join me in questions. But while you're thinking about them, another one from me is we have this area in WPP called the Institute for Real Growth. And we work with CMOs and others to think about, okay, what does it take? What are the principles that we see the disproportionately companies that are exceeding others in the sort of ability to sustain growth, real true growth in the organization that's done in a principled way, many of the themes that we're talking about here. And when I think about your business and think about just this last several months, as everyone said, COVID has been accelerant. It's accelerated good and it's accelerated bad. And it was usually a trajectory that companies and businesses and sometimes people were on already anyway. And your company has really met in a very fast-paced way so much of what was going to probably come to your business. It's just come to your business in 3 months, maybe more versus 3 years. So that to me is a bit of a real growth, both challenge and opportunity for your business. How have you, modeled yourself for the speed of change and to be able to deliver against sort of the speed at a high performance level and get situated so that you can maintain that?
Yeah, wait, ask that last part again, just to make sure that
and also, how have you situated the organization so that you can maintain that kind of speed of growth and performance?
Yeah. It's funny. We are a very flat organization and we still operate like a startup in many ways. We're a Fortune 500 company now, but we operate like a startup and we have a startup mentality. right? And I think that's what allows us to move fast. You know, we don't have a lot of layers and levels of approval similar to what I'm used to coming from the CPG. And so that allows us to move fast. You know, we believe good ideas can come from anywhere, and anyone has an opportunity to sort of build something, test something, experiment, see what works, and keep going. And so I think that, and that comes from the top, right? The top down. And so having that type of culture, I think really sets you up to be able to move fast and innovate and capture that growth. You know, we also are really focused on, you know, insights, understanding the competition, understanding the landscape. You know, when we do these future of reports, it's because we spend a lot of time really trying to understand what's going on in the market so that we have those insights to think through, okay, now what does that mean we need to do? And so, you know, one, being set up to move fast, but then having the right data and insights to help you, propel you to know what to do. I think that combination is what allows us to really be able to sort of, you know, focus on growth.
That's a very good answer. And I'm sure also one that you all have a lot of internal conversations. I was going to say leadership conversations, but to the horizontal organization piece, I'm sure across the company, you're having those kind of conversations all the time to think about how do you manage those trade-offs, if you will. Yep. Okay, so I did get a good audience question on social. And this will be interesting, again, from a B2B and then B2B to C perspective. But what is the role of social for your business? And are you leaning into social platforms in new ways?
Oh, that's such a great question. And it's so funny. We just hired a new, head of social just a couple months ago, actually. And so we're having these discussions now, really thinking about what is the role of social. And I'm talking from an organic side because, you know, from paid, we still use it as a marketing channel, similar to most brands, right? To reach, to provide mass reach. But when we think about how we're using like our social communities, you know, and talking about it, how do we use it to humanize the brand and tell the stories of a lot of these business owners and kind of just showcase the resilience, you know, and the strength of business owners and use it to inspire, right? Inspire others to start businesses. You know, how do we obviously use it for connection and that two-way conversation? How do we use it to potentially educate? You know, we're talking about how our different social channels can all play a different role. You know, we did an IG live last night where we were bringing together, you know, leaders and business owners to kind of talk about the future of what's happening and what's going to happen in 2022. And so I think social it remains a really powerful channel, and especially during the pandemic where we were limited in a lot of our in real life activations that the company used to rely on to connect with a lot of these business owners. And so now we use social as a way to do that and really to engage. And so I think, you know, we're still hammering it out. We're talking about a lot of the new channels. You know, we've been up across on Facebook and Instagram, but now we're really focused on, you know, the future, you know, and there's a lot of conversation around TikTok. Well, how should we be using TikTok and what does that look like? So, you know, I don't have all the answers yet. These are things that we're trying to figure out right now.
Well, thank you for giving us a peek into some of the things that you guys are beginning to figure out. And we'll, again, another topic you have to keep us posted on. So I know we only have a couple minutes left. So I want to just thank you, Tia, and also to correct Tia Cummings Hopkins. I don't know where I got Webster from. I was looking at another thing on my screen. And so Tia, for everybody who's interested in following you, looking you up on LinkedIn, connecting with you, Tia Cummings Hopkins, it's been an absolute pleasure. And, you know, thank you for your time today and good luck as you head into 2022 and happy holidays.
Thank you so much, Beth. It was great chatting. Happy holidays to you too.
Great. Thank you so much, Tia and Beth Ann. I really enjoyed the discussion, really around how to be successful, purpose-driven brand, how important it is to be authentic, organic, really ensure your brand, you know, can really embody the purpose, you know, in a genuine way. Such an important thing as brands are getting more into that purpose-driven space. So thank you so much for the thoughts there. And Tia, I love how in tune you are with the small business needs and that you guys are really innovating around products and different ways to support them. Like, you know, you saying even too covering some of their fees and offering small business loans. I think that's really meaningful. So really appreciate you guys sharing and having this meaningful conversation for us today.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye. So next up, audience, we're going to have Laura Niebush, the VP Consumer Experience for Georgia Pacific, and Rachel Bennington, the VP CPG for Ground Truth. I'll give them a moment to join us. Hi, Rachel. Hi, Laura. Oh, here we go. Hi, Rachel. How are you?
Hi, doing well. How are you?
Good, thank you. Hi, Laura.
Hi, how is everybody?
Great.
Good. Thank you guys both for joining us. Laura, I may have murdered your last name when I just was introducing you to our audience, so I will let you.
You did perfect. Most people get it wrong, and you guys
did
got it right.
Good. I'm so glad. So sometimes those can be the biggest challenge of being the MC for the day. So Rachel and Laura, welcome to our stage today. I really appreciate you both being here. Look forward to the conversation. And Rachel, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you to kind of kick us off and do introductions.
Great.
Thanks, you guys.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having us today. Laura and I had the chance to visit last week, and I've really enjoyed getting to know her, hear from her, and just your wisdom. So I'm looking forward to sharing all of this with you today. We'll just do brief introductions. Laura, do you want to go ahead and go first and tell a little bit about your role?
Sure. My name, again, is Laura Niebush, and I am the head of marketing and consumer experience at Georgia Pacific Consumer Products. So we have a number of brands and household paper categories like paper towels, toilet paper, paper plates, and napkins. And my capability in marketing consumer experience encompasses everything from content to media and digital, social, shopper marketing, promotions, consumer affairs, and marketing technology, kind of all the capabilities needed to help our brand teams achieve their brand objectives.
I love that. That's going to be helpful talking about 2022 predictions, because you cover a lot on your team. I'm Rachel Bennington. I'm our VP of CPG here at Ground Truth. We are a leading location all screen advertising company, and I lead our shopper team. So we've got sellers that are on coast to coast and serving clients from big box to club to just smaller hyper local retailers. So really looking forward to sharing some of the things that we've come across in our research, and also just visiting a little bit of the trends we've seen in the past and how we see that playing into predictions for the future. So we will hop right in. So we really wouldn't be doing justice in talking about predictions for next year without acknowledging that these past 2 years have been a roller coaster for all of us. And anyone that we're visiting with, I know, Laura, we talked about this last week. We've had so many learnings and had to adapt so quickly in this changing environment. So Laura, I'll ask you just to start out, what have been some of the biggest learnings about your consumers throughout this new normal, and how have you integrated those learnings into your evolving customer experience?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously as you said, the last 2 years have been a significant change and impact happening. I mean, really starting in 2020, so much disruption and challenge, but it also created a really unique opportunity for brands like ours. As I mentioned, these are household paper categories. These are categories that are very stable, and household penetration doesn't kind of vary a lot. And so while for a really challenging reason, due to the unprecedented demand for paper products during this time, we actually saw a number of new users come into the brand. So it gave us a very unique opportunity to not just continue to build relationships with our current consumers and reassure them during this time period, but to really understand who these new households, these new consumers are in these households, and how to build a relationship with them ongoing, not just based on necessity, not just based on being the product on the shelf, but being the product that they choose because they connect with your brand and what your brand is going to deliver to them. So, kind of coming out of 2020, that was one of our big focus areas. But to do so, we had to recognize the other big impacts that were happening out in the world. Certainly, media fragmentation and the accelerated shift to digital, recognizing that consumers were using media in very different ways. And that was going to mean we needed to shift our strategies to not just how we reached our current consumers, but how do we reach these new consumers? What are the new digital tools that we can use to target them and find them and continue to build that relationship? And then certainly, we talked a lot about the shift to omni-channel retail. So just the fact that consumers were shopping so differently, particularly for CPG, which while had continued to grow from an e-commerce standpoint, saw e-commerce growth, leapfrog 3 to 4 years in a matter of months. And so really making sure then that as we thought about reaching our consumer and, kind of across the funnel, that we were thinking through how to do so kind of at the full funnel, and be able to convert them where they wanted to shop. So I would say, understanding these new consumers and particularly how they interacted from a media standpoint, and then certainly kind of their shopping behavior, all were pretty critical for us in 2021, and we'll hope to continue to inform us as we move into 2022.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can relate with you on the digital side, just having to evolve so quickly in real time in response to what our clients were needing, which is why we developed one of our solutions, which was in-stock targeting, knowing where and understanding where products were in stock and being able to inform your consumers in real time that this store has this product in stock and you can shop here and have a great customer experience, from the great toilet paper shortage of 2019. So with that, with supply chain, I know a lot of people are asking, because we've continued to see that supply chain breakdown in 2020 and 2021. What is your prediction for 2022? Do you see that continuing, the logistics and supply chain breakdown of issues that you're facing?
Sure. I mean, I think as we've certainly all seen out in the world, there are going to continue to be supply chain challenges. There are kind of broader macro issues happening that are going to make it difficult. But we have continued to certainly ramp up all our manufacturing, which we've been doing ever since the start of the pandemic, to ensure that we can get the right product to the consumers when they need it. So, obviously there's a lot of things that are continuing to be dynamic, as we think about kind of out in the world and what we've learned in 2020 and 2021. But we believe absolutely we're prepared for that.
That's great. The other thing that I think that we saw during this time, and you touched on this previously when speaking to the new consumers that you saw during this time, what about, we saw a lot of what we call switchers during this time of brand loyalists who for a long time would have been loyal to a product and then switched because of availability. How has Georgia Pacific adjusted to be able to retain these so-called switchers or new consumers? What would be some of your advice if you're a brand out there that has seen some of these things happen, and how did Georgia Pacific lean in on this?
Sure. I think it starts with understanding who these consumers are, and then starting again with what your brand stands for and why you think your brand, how you think they can deliver value to this consumer above and beyond maybe their other alternatives. And so that's been a big focus of consumer experience, is just how to bring that to life across all aspects of how we interact with our consumers, is being very crystal clear on, brand purpose. That's something that I heard Tia speaking about as well, but kind of what does our brand stand for, both from a product and emotional standpoint, but what is it really bringing from a societal standpoint, and then making sure that consumers can connect with that. And again, becomes more than just a product on the shelf. It becomes something more valuable in their lives. So that's probably, I think job one for any brand is, how are you doing that? But then certainly leveraging both kind of traditional tools and tactics that we've had, plus new tools and tactics. How do we actually target and find these consumers in a way that's both efficient and effective, and helping to keep our brand in front of them throughout their kind of purchase journey?
Absolutely. I know one thing at Ground Truth that we tried to adapt is really understanding where these consumers for each specific brand are consuming their media. What screen is that? Is that CTV? Is that OTT? Is that mobile? And where does that really meet that consumer of where they're engaging most, and how can we be relevant and speak to the brand's goals in those spaces? So tell me a little bit about that for you. How has Georgia Pacific evolved with just the where they're meeting those consumers like you talked about?
Sure. I mean, it starts with the consumer and the brand objective, what we're trying to do. And so for a brand that's, where we're launching a new product and it's more about awareness driving, we might think differently than if the brand where it's really about growing maybe purchase occasions or buy rate with a loyal user. So it very much has to start with that objective. And then it starts with kind of understanding that consumer journey and continuing to inform our understanding because it is changing. And so making sure that we're keeping pulse on kind of what's changing and that shifting behavior. And we do that through research that we do ourselves, through research that we syndicate, and certainly leveraging many of our agency partners to kind of put together a holistic view of what touch points do we think are going to be most impactful in achieving those objectives, and then identifying the right mix to do that. So certainly, as I think about moving into 2022, we've seen consumers shift more into digital overall, certainly more into streaming, certainly into more mobile, audio, gaming. So we'll continue to take all of those into account as we think about kind of the right places to reach our consumers.
I love that. So one of my favorite questions that I always love hearing when speakers are on Brand Innovators is, what are you most looking forward to in 2022?
Oh, sure. It has been an exciting year. We're in such a dynamic, it's such a dynamic, time of in history, I would say. I mean, I've been in marketing for 15 plus years and have never seen the amount of change. So, I'm most looking forward to next year. We have been doing some great work with our brands around really articulating their brand purpose, not changing it, but articulating it in a way that we think is going to most connect with consumers. And we have a number of our brands who are going to be bringing that to life with new campaigns next year. And I'm really excited to see those come to life and understand consumers' reaction and interaction with it, but not just come to life overall, but how we're continuing to do that in kind of the shifting environment that we're seeing out there. So how we're doing that through new touch points and testing and learning, how those new touch points are really going to fit into our strategies moving forward.
I love that. I think that, for my team, it's the same. Being able to respond in real time to the needs, it always keeps you on your toes, and making sure that you are evolving with that, and that you're being able to serve your customers best with where they're wanting to engage with those consumers is constantly changing, and it keeps it exciting. So I think that both of us connect in that way with things we're excited about in 2022. With that, how has innovation played a role? I'm very curious, and I know a lot of the audience probably is too. During this time, did you have products that were set to launch that maybe you had to put on hold or rethink the strategy during the past few years? And how does that play a part into 2022?
Sure. I'll talk about it more. I think, I don't know that we had anything that we had on hold, but what we have seen is some changing and, again, shifting consumer behaviors because of the pandemic, things that like health and wellness, and certainly cleaning behavior. And those play into important aspects of our categories like paper towels, or even paper plates and paper napkins when you think about hygiene, when you think about just kind of wellness for your family. So, what it has allowed us to do is really, I think, continue to look at our innovation and identify, did that accelerate an opportunity for an innovation we had out there? Was there a way to talk about some innovation we had that we thought would be even more relevant? For example, we launched Brawny Tear Square prior to the pandemic. This is it's not just a towel that you can, tear into or tear a square, but pick a size, but it's, you can tear it into 4. So as you think about all the cleaning occasions people had at home, things like wiping, washing hands, or kind of just wiping off doorknobs, like not having to waste a whole paper towel and being able to choose the size of your paper towel became even more beneficial. So being able to talk to consumers about the fact, against that insight made it even more relevant for a broader group of consumers. We're relaunching or are launching a new version of our touchless paper towel dispenser right now, Anovia. And that's something, again, as you think about hygiene, not having to touch that paper towel dispenser, just one less place to have germs. So I think what it did was help us highlight where we had even more opportunity with our innovation pipeline to really address kind of increasing concerns that came from the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, I think the messaging has followed. What we have seen from brands and from our clients is really wanting to think of creative ways to not only reach them on the screens that they're at, but speak that message to them. I know last week when we were visiting, one of the commercials that really stuck in my mind was when Walmart had their CEO, Doug McMillon. He was in a store and he was wearing a mask, his employees were wearing a mask, and he talked about safety of the consumers, safety of the employees, and just really the messaging being very relevant and in tune with the audience that's watching it. And we've watched brands do that same thing. So much to your point of innovation and how it's, with the demand of the time, being able to evolve to that, that messaging goes along with it. And we see that as such an important strategy in 2022 as well. That's great. So let's talk a little bit about omni-channel versus multi-channel strategies. And within your team, you have so many people that you manage and so many different departments. I felt like this was a great conversation when we talked about this last week, just even from a learning standpoint for all of us. How do you look at those two types of KPIs, if you will, of managing that omni-channel, also managing multi-channel, or are they the same?
Yeah, I think today they have to be the same. In the past, we might have thought about them differently, and I don't think we can anymore. No, you're not going to be successful in the future if you're not thinking about it from the start as an omni-channel journey. And so, and I think that's what we've tried to do, and where we've continued to build our knowledge is understanding the consumer journey. And there's not just one. We recognize there are nuances to different consumers and their journeys and brands and categories, but getting more knowledge and understanding, where they start even considering brands, thinking about these categories, all the way to where and how they're making their shopping decisions, becomes so important. Then as you think about truly then constructing a total omni-channel marketing plan that will, keep your brand, make them aware of your brand, keep them top of mind, have them in the consideration set, and then when they're trying to make their purchase decision in the right place, to drive that final interaction. So it's got to be omni-channel first. While my whole team needs to think omni-channel, we structured some roles to make sure that we were really thinking about it in a more integrated way.
I love that. One of the questions that we got ahead of time was really asking about the data. So what data do you find most helpful when you're trying to make some of those decisions, or even with your team? What data points do they really lean on in terms of directing any of those strategies? Anything that you can share in that?
Yes. I think a big focus of, as I've come into this role, I've been in it about 18 months now, has been on building the right data foundation. In my mind, data is the fuel. It's not the outcome, but it's the fuel that's going to really power us. Then it needs people and technology and other things to bring it to life in a way that's really going to create impact. So one of the first things I did was, do we have the right data sources? And then are these data sources connected in a way that we can tell a story from them? Because what I found, at least in our organization, is we had a lot of data, but they weren't necessarily talking to each other. And if you didn't look at them holistically, you may not make the right decision. And that could be everything from sales data to marketing mix modeling to qualitative research to kind of media KPIs. So the more that we can connect that data in a way that we can understand kind of the more holistic picture of what's happening, the better we'll be able to make the right decisions. And then we needed to make the data more accessible. It can't just be one or two data scientists or analysts who are the only ones looking at the data. In today's world, to be agile and to be more effective, more people need to have access to the data in a way that they can make decisions. And so that's been kind of just the foundation. So it's not just been about the types of data. It's really been like, how do we connect it and make it accessible so that we can really use it in a way that's impactful. But certainly we use a lot of the traditional, as I mentioned, a lot of the data sources I just mentioned, certainly understanding sales from IRI, marketing mix. We've got some other kind of digital attribution things we use, consumer insights, leveraging our agencies where they have kind of consumer knowledge. All of that's kind of building into the plans.
Yeah, absolutely. I can speak on the same on our side, using those data points to really, inform what you're doing and making sure that it's actionable insights that are true and relevant, and even by category, if it's more specific. But, feeling like that is going to continue as the trend in 2022 is absolutely, you're right. Data means everything. It's the currency and should be that's fueling you forward. So I've really enjoyed hearing about that from you. So let's talk about the customer journey. I know that one of those things we really connected on is that the customer, really understanding that customer and having that set everything that you do, the strategy to anything else that's connected with that. For you and your team, where does that sit? Does that customer journey sit with marketing, with research, finance, advertising? Who owns this, or does everybody own this?
It's a great question, because I will say somebody owns the development of it, but everybody needs to own the activation. So particularly in our organization, when I took on this role, I talked to a lot of different resources and tried to understand, like, how do you even get to a consumer journey? Because we hadn't technically kind of put the consumer journey down on paper. And what I found was there's no one right way to do it. There's many different ways to get it, but kind of just pulling your best knowledge and creating some hypotheses was a good place to start. We actually decided to do some specific customer or consumer journey research, and that was led by our consumer knowledge, or our market research organization, working very close collaboration with my team. However, to be successful in an omni-channel world, to deliver a really good consumer experience, everyone has to recognize their role in it, because every interaction can create a positive or negative impact on brand perception and on that consumer experience. So it wasn't, while we certainly have a lot of capabilities on my team, I by no means am responsible for every, can be responsible for every interaction. So R&D absolutely needs to understand the product experience and how that's bringing it to life. Sales from, do we have distribution in the right places? Or, supply chain, do we have the right product on shelf? Do we have the right assortment and packs? All of these things, play a role, and all those interactions. And so, having it as one thing, I think helping people understand the role they play in bringing it to life is the second, and both are critical as you think about kind of delivering on that, truly kind of positive or, exceeding consumers' expectations with their experience.
Oh, I like that. That's great. And then with the consumer journey, how often do you revisit that? Is that something that is constant conversation? You feel like you have like a quarterly, let's review the data and talk about this? What has been kind of your best practice or advice for other marketers out there on, what has worked for your team?
Sure. I mean, I will, I'll give you my opinion, as well as kind of what I gathered when I did a lot of this conversation with others is, if you're going to many people do like a foundational study around consumer journey, but that should be something that there's a lot of longevity to that. Hopefully outside of a pandemic, it shouldn't be shifting a lot, from a quarter to quarter. However, within that, you're going to have key hypotheses or key questions you're going to want to answer around either how impactful is this touch point, or what's the right content for this touch point. And usually that's what you're kind of testing and learning about every year. There might be a couple key things you want to learn, and then you're constantly informing. And it is something that I think as you get additional pieces of information, you can continue to update it. But from a foundational standpoint, I would say that doesn't change. That should be something you're doing every couple years versus something that you're looking at multiple times a year.
Yes, I think that's great. And then following that strategy all the way through, what are some ways that you've been able to bring your teams together to plan out any of your campaigns or messaging to make sure that all departments are really catch that vision for where you're headed, and their programs align with that?
Sure. So so again, that comes to some of the reason my team is the way it is today, which is to create more integration among, I would say kind of different touch points on the consumer journey. So instead of just having media in a silo and search in a silo and social in a silo, bringing those together into what we would call more of like an integrated marketing team, so that we're thinking about it at, from the very beginning as to how the different tactics might play across those touch points. And then working with, again, our brand teams, going back to starting with kind of what's the objective, and then thinking about it in a more integrated way. So I would say that, really making sure we're clear on the objective, and then kind of structuring my team in a way that we can bring together the data and kind of come up with those recommendations are two key things that we're doing to try and accomplish that.
I love that. Yeah, I would say in this past quarter too, as I feel like our suppliers are getting a little bit better handle on, what could this future look like and how do we plan for that? I think one really great practice that we've seen is coming into, once your strategy is set by your team, being able to have multiple vendors that are all going to activate on a said campaign in the room, in the conversation, so that we can see if there's any additional synergies. If you're working with a couponing company or someone who's going to do in-store signage, how can that message be throughout with all of the vendors that you're working with? And how can we create best practices amongst us to be able to serve you even better? So that's one thing that I know our team is really leaning into with our supplier partners, that further takes that partnership that you have and that integration with your team all the way throughout to the consumers, to the vendors, to your end goals. So I really like that. Let's talk a little bit about, let's see, we've got a lot of great questions on here, and I know the audience, we're supposed to leave time for the audience too. So let's talk about in-store versus e-com. We saw during the pandemic this big switch to e-com. Now we're seeing foot traffic start to come back to a little bit more of a normalized state. How has your team approached that brick versus clicks split, if you will, or what your approach is to that?
Sure. Again, I think it comes back to the consumer journey and understanding and continuing to track where they're making that shift. While consumers are definitely back, coming back into the store more, I think what we've also seen is that acceptance of e-commerce, particularly for those who just tried it during the pandemic, is here to stay. So it's really going to become about what is easiest for them, not that we're going to see consumers who are really only doing one versus the other. So overall, as we've looked at our plans, again, kind of starting all the way to the beginning of the journey, trying to think about the things that we need to do to make sure that our brands are within the consideration set as they come to their conversion choices. Then it's just making sure that we're balancing our investments in a way that we think that we are, delivering the right message or the right incentive to the consumer at the right time. It's making sure as we look across brick and mortar and e-commerce, do we have the right assortment across both? Do we have the right content, particularly as you think about as we get into e-com? Are we supporting it appropriately with things like retail media? Because that honestly can support whether you're online or whether you're supporting kind of what's happening in store. So really just kind of thinking across some of those key tools that we leverage. What do we think is kind of just foundation for helping to drive help them in their conversion and in their shopping experience. And shifting and kind of balancing that as we continue to learn.
Absolutely. Speaking of retail media groups, I think that this is also a big prediction. The partnerships are going to still continue to grow strong with retail media groups. I know that vendors like us will always look at that as, yes, that is your key partnership. And for us, it's where can we serve you in any gaps or in any quicker activations, or if there's any other KPIs that you have that fall in line with what we do outside of those. For you with retail media groups, where are some of the main ways that you're seeing that partnership really be advantageous?
Yes, I mean, certainly as we've looked at kind of just the onset of omni-channel and e-commerce, understanding the role that retail media can play for your brand, and whether it's, search, it certainly can be very powerful, or from a display, and just kind of, again, making sure that your brand is in front of the consumer as they're making their decision. We've certainly seen kind of the benefit of that. It's not a one size fits all. Like, this is an area where, again, we're doing a lot of test and learning because things are evolving so rapidly. New players are coming into the market pretty rapidly. And I agree, this is something that this is also here to stay and is going to continue to grow. If you look at any of the predictions, it's going to continue to grow double digits over the next couple of years. So identifying for your specific brand, the role it can play against your objectives, having a good measurement and test and learn plan in place, I think is really important to make sure that you understand kind of how it fits within your other alternatives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say too, always that important role. We understand that, retail media networks and making sure that you have that strong partnership with that retailer, and that's always going to play an important role. But just to your point, that test and learn outside of where those budgets are committed really allows you to evolve very quickly. I know one of the things that I was excited about this last year is, we had a client come to us and say, we have this great TikTok influencer that we're using, but we also have this insight that our consumer is between this age that's also engaging on CTV and OTT. How can we make it relevant there? And so we took that asset and we created a 30-second spot with the TikTok video being featured in the middle and the product and a scannable QR code for CTV, and being able to do that in real time, because that's where the consumers were engaging, is certainly somewhere where vendors can lean in with suppliers like you in real time that might be outside of your retail media commits. So I think that that's exciting for 2022 and the future too, is just really listening to what are the needs and being able to adapt quickly to those. I can't wait to see what those needs are going to be and how we respond to that next year. So I know that we are close to being out of time, and we've got still option for any live questions. So Andrea, if you're on and you can see those questions, feel free to ask them. But if we see any on our side, we will answer those as well. Otherwise, I'm sure we have a couple great questions here that we can finish up with. I'll give her a minute and see if she hops back on. Okay.
I actually don't see any questions right now in our lineup. So if you had any other additional last ones, Rachel, please go ahead.
Okay, let's see here. Okay, let's ask you more of I would love to hear just, wrapping up things for this year. How has your team really seen ways to finish strong so that you feel like you can wrap a bow on this year and then start next year, full speed ahead?
Sure. I mean, obviously we're in December, so it's really about assessing, to your point, assessing what worked for us, where we did make shifts in 2021, assessing what's worked for us, and assessing where the shifts we think are going to continue to happen into 2022. I mean, as I mentioned, as I think about my key predictions about, what's going to continue to happen into 2022, certainly, I think the growth in omni-channel is going to continue. It's real, it's here to stay, it's going to continue, and everyone needs to be thinking about kind of their holistic plans and then with omni-channel first mentality. I think media fragmentation is also going to continue to accelerate, a shift to digital, a shift to mobile. So continue to make sure you're thinking about where your consumers' eyeballs are and what that means as far as where you think your brand should be. How do you leverage data? We're moving into a pretty interesting time period with data, where we talked a lot about the power of data, but we're also in a period of time where, we might be seeing less data because of cookie deprecation. So having the right data strategies, having the right data foundation, but also proactively thinking about what to do, in the future as the data changes. And then kind of, we talked about just kind of brand purpose and how we're connecting with our consumers and making sure our brands are kind of first and foremost, and, identifying, what's meaningful to consumers about our brands beyond just the product. How are we connecting with them beyond just our product in a way that really provides greater impact to their life and greater impact to society? I think these are 4 key trends that are going to continue. And I think they're things that we are going to be watching, as we look to close out 2021 and continue to make sure we're starting 2022 in the strongest way possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll echo that. I know that we've really encouraged our teams here at Ground Truth to take that moment to have reflection. I think that so often we're moving at such a fast pace that we don't take the time to really step back and reflect on what those learnings are, to document them, to learn from them, and pivot for this next year. So we are actually scheduling time in our schedules to have that no meeting time, where you have that dedicated time to be able to do that. I think another way is connecting with all of our top suppliers and ask them, where can we lean in and do research and be those experts for you? And what questions or problems do you have that you'd like us to help solve? And really being able to do some of that data collection. It's the end of the year, so it's really fresh on a lot of suppliers' minds, just like yours. As you're reflecting, you're going to come up with things and ways that vendors like us can lean in and help. And so I think that this is really valuable as you serve customers like Georgia Pacific to be able to do. And then one other way I thought was interesting is we're in kind of executive reviews with some of our top clients. I've been asked by multiple clients, what is one way we're spending money with you that in your opinion is not efficient? And so these are always uncomfortable questions, because on the other side, you've got this trusted relationship with your clients and you want to give them the best, but in full transparency at the end, because we are the experts at what we do and we see things that maybe the brand doesn't, it is our job to say, you know what, this is probably not efficient for your money in this way. And here's how we would recommend being more efficient based on what we do and what we do best to help you for the future. And so if you haven't asked those questions of your vendors, we are prepared to answer those. And I hope that, we can all lean in these next couple weeks to finish out this year strong so that we can learn and grow and sharpen each other this next year. Because I think that that's what these last few years have been about, is we're watching in real time what everyone's doing and we're all growing because of it. So that's been exciting to me as well. Well, no other questions have come through. And so I know, Lauren, I would love to connect with you on LinkedIn or any other social platforms. If you see us, connect with us, and I'm happy to answer questions or help point you in the right direction, or just give you an honest opinion of where we're at in our journeys, encourage you. And we always find these brand innovator talks to be really helpful in learning from each other. So thank you for being a part today. And thank you, Laura, so much. I've really enjoyed learning from you.
Yes, thank you. It's been great to be here.
Thank you guys both so much. I have one last question. Laura, if you could give advice to any kind of other marketers out there on, what to really prioritize for 2022, what would that be?
Does it have to just be one? Can I make it more than one?
It can be more than one.
I would say, to me, there's in two different areas. One, I would say brand purpose. And again, I think Tia talked about this, in one of the previous sessions, and I wholeheartedly agree. Like, starting with fundamentally, how is your brand adding value and how are you communicating that to consumers? And that starts with understanding what value is to them, and then understanding the DNA of your brand and authentically identifying how that can come to life. So I would say, more and more, again, it's not just about the product benefit, it's about that broader benefit that you're providing. And so I think any marketer today needs to understand about the brand. On the opposite, I would say data. The second thing, though, is you need to embrace data. And everybody, I still see people who are like, well, that's data scientists are going to do that, or analysts are going to do that. We all need to be data analysts in some way, shape, or form, because there's so much data out there that can help bring that brand purpose to life in a way that's going to be more effective, more efficient, more engaging to consumers. And so being able to, I think, marry those, that art and science, is really what the marketer of the future is going to look like. And I think that's and the companies that can do that and the marketers can do that, those are the ones who I think are going to be successful in 2022 and beyond.
Yeah, definitely been hearing a lot of discussions around that, how to really embody your brand purpose and make it authentic and organic and really, and then so many marketers that I talk to also have challenges around that data part of it. And I loved what you were talking about, yes, there's that data, and we have lots of resources around that data, and we have these data scientists, but how do you make it actionable? How do you, connect it? How do you make it usable for the team so that you can make smarter decisions? I really loved, that insight. I thought that was great. So thank you so much. This has been a really fun conversation, really great insights shared, even around the innovation part of it, the customer journey. Really, I think we covered a lot of different topics in this short amount of time. So I really appreciate you guys providing, us with your time today and participating in our final live cast of the year. I can't believe that it's already getting to the end of December. But hopefully some of you will be joining us at CES or tuning in for some of our CES content as well. Hopefully we'll see you there. I know a couple of people from your team are coming.
Yes. You will see some folks there from our team.
Yeah. Are you not planning to be there? Just in
No,
general?
I won't be there this year, but you'll have a couple of my key leaders on my team there. So
yeah, wonderful. Yeah, I do a couple were coming, so we're really looking forward to that. But thank you again so much for your time, sharing the best practices and this great discussion. Have a great one and happy holidays.
Happy holidays and happy New Year.
You as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for hanging in there. I can't believe the afternoon has gone so fast. So many great discussions so far. Now, though, we're coming up on our final session of the day. So I'll give them a second to kind of get on screen here and join us. But we're going to be welcoming Aaron Magnus, the CMO of Thistle, and also Lee Grant, the Senior Director of Sales at Influential. So we'll give them a moment here to join us. Hi, Aaron. How are you?
I'm fantastic. How you doing?
Great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, guys. Can you hear me?
Hi, Lee, how are you? Yes.
Good.
Yeah, thank you,
Awesome.
guys. I already introduced you to the audience. So I will, go ahead and just say, thank you so much for joining us. This is our final session of the day. We've had some really great speakers today. And I'm excited to kind of finish it with a bang with the two of you. I will go ahead and hand it over to you, Lee, to take it away and kick and do kind of introductions and start the conversation.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. And everyone who's tuning in, you're in for a great treat here with Aaron. We've had the pleasure of working together on some influencer campaigns this past year. And Thistle's really, a really interesting leader in the space, coming from, sustainability and a lot of the, major changes that have happened over the past 2 years. So we have a great conversation, Aaron. Would love for, the Brand Innovators audience to learn a little bit more about Thistle if you aren't familiar with them. So I'd love to hear from you a little bit of the background of the company and what you guys have been doing.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Super excited. Obviously, great to see you, Lee. We've been around for a minute. But still in that startup space. We're a modern tech-enabled health and nutrition company focused on food, organic, and nutrition products that are delivered, prepared, created internally, prepared, fresh, and delivered straight to your door for the most possible convenience. So, I think for us, in this space, which oftentimes people say, oh, it's all this food delivery space, it's so crowded. I think when you peel back the layers of the onion, you actually realize it's not as crowded. And there are some folks who really stand for things that, are really important. And I feel that we're one of them. We do have a goal to make it easy to get and stay healthy, but as equally as important, while also enhancing the sustainability of our food system. So I think those two things really go together, and it's something we stand for a lot as a company. Today we are launched on exclusively on the West Coast, but super exciting about later this year expanding East Coast as we continue to bring delicious meals nationwide.
I love it. And you guys have such an incredible, really, mission that you guys have brought to life. And I think, before we really get into your 2022 predictions, we'd love to kind of look back at the past year. I think all of us have been reeling, going, wow, we've basically spent, since past 2 years in a completely different world. But there's a lot of things, obviously going through a pandemic that have to change. But I think there are some interesting things that, have changed for the better. So I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on pre to post pandemic going into 2022. What are some of the ways that you really saw the pandemic shift consumer behavior? I know you and I talked about this, from food consumption to the way that we're shopping. I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely. And, let's not lose sight of the fact that we are not out of a pandemic, right? Like, I think that is a super, super important thing to note.
Pre to mid-pandemic.
Right. But to your point, people are still talking about, last year, and realize, that was 3 years ago we were talking. So there's a lot of time on pause, but I do think some specific things have changed in how people have adjusted through the pandemic. I think, there's more people that are focused on time. What does that mean? I know I used to spend almost 3 hours a day commuting to and from the office that I don't do anymore. Now I'm in more or less a big closet, but that's besides the point. But that's a big component. What else is important to them? People think a lot about their family, their friends, the personal relationships that they have. So I think that has really stood out. And then lastly, their health, and what are the things that they can do. I think we probably all did, or many of us did similar. Right at the pandemic, I'm going to become a mixologist and drink every cocktail that I can.
Yeah.
That's not the most healthful.
I'm a chef. I'm a mixologist.
Right. But I do think those three things have drastically changed, and then they've influenced how people make decisions. And And I think where that starts to come out, obviously the adoption of e-com, and it sounds so weird to think about it, right? Like, because some industries, obviously adoption has been huge, but in grocery and food delivery, it wasn't. Remember, like food delivery used to be special occasion, I'm going to order out. And then now, so much grocery delivery and at-home meal deliveries have really taken off. And then you couple that with, well, how are people then thinking about the first three pieces that, we talked about? And I think there's some drastic changes in how people have thought about, consumption. And with those are here to stay. I don't think this is a pendulum swing from, from the pandemic. I do think once adoption is there, it'll stay and maintain and probably accelerate even more so.
I completely agree. I think that, all of us have had conversations about how the pandemic has changed our lives. To your point, I'm here in Los Angeles. I would get in my car. I go to a SoulCycle class in the morning. I come back, get in a full outfit for work, then drive all the way into the office, and you stop for coffee. The way that you think of time was so much different. And I think a lot of us can relate of basically my alarm goes off, I walk downstairs, I make coffee, and I start working, and I start thinking about things in a very different way. Like, how can I shave off as much time in my life to be as productive as possible, spend the most time with my family, and do the things that I want to do, right? So I think, even if we think about people are going less into grocery stores, and coupled with that, even, kind of before the pandemic, there was such a focus on health. Now consumers, and I think you and I appreciated that we moved from consumer to really it's just people. It's you and I, we want to relate to brands, and we're expecting and kind of holding brands accountable to, look at bigger world topics like sustainability and health. So I'd love to, hear your opinion on how has this all, seen those major changes in the way that consumers want to relate to brands, and then really relayed that in your marketing and really your mission.
Yeah, I'll start with, I do think there are 4 macro trends that are, really standing out, and that will be here and for the foreseeable future. I think, for foreseeable future, people will continue to be time starved. And in being time starved, they need to find solutions that can actually help them carve out minutes through the day. Like you were talking about prepping food. I read a study that average American spends 52 minutes a day just on prep, cooking, and cleaning dinner. So like if you can take those sections out, that's a big deal. I think a second macro trend, people continue to focus on their health. We talked a bit about that. And that could be in a bunch of different ways. How do I stay fit? How do I eat better? And as it parlays to rolls into the eat better, I do think people have an appreciation that, we should probably eat less meat, from a health perspective. Not suggesting everyone is going vegan, vegetarian. Flexitarian is at a very, center of how people think about their daily diets. So if they're eating less meat and, saving time and, focusing on their health, I think the last piece is they're going to continue to vote with their dollar or with their wallet on businesses that are making an impact. I think people have a greater appreciation around climate change and sustainability, and they're actually gravitating to businesses that are taking a stand in that, as well as other social impact issues. So I think those are areas that Thistle is actually uniquely positioned to do well at. From a little bit more about the founding story, we were founded by an amazing husband and wife team, where Ash, our CEO, co-founder, came from a family of doctors that have been fighting, early onset diseases caused by diet. Shiri has her PhD in environmental sciences. She has been fighting, how do you want to make the biggest impact on the climate? Both of them come to the same conclusion. Well, modern diet, with its over-reliance on meat, is the issue. And if we eat less meat, we actually help drive both those impacts down. So I think if that's at the core of what we do and these macro trends are there, I'm really excited about what Thistle's doing and, where we can go in 2022 and well beyond.
Yeah, definitely. And you guys are really at the center of it. I think too, in terms of those macro trends, you look at really there's been a new platform for holistic health, right? Whether it's mental health, whether it's the health of the earth, and how everything that we do as consumers or people really make an impact. And I think, brands again are just being held accountable for these. So I think, of course, as Thistle, you're really at the heart of it. As you think about some of the other brands who are having to kind of pivot these past 2 years, do you have some advice on, how they can lean into these macro trends and stay nimble enough to be able to pivot?
I think that's a very big question, but such an important one, right? And almost even, what is the point of the brand, and how do you, maybe this starts to flow to, well, what is 22 and beyond from a prediction standpoint? I think, as Laura was just saying, the things that are really important are, focusing on brand purpose and data. And I fully agree with that. I will add, or maybe augment a little bit of those. How do you provide value, to your customer? And I think the brands that are giving themselves permission to adapt to today's marketplace are always trying to find ways to add value. And value doesn't have to be, how do you have the lowest price, or how do you have the biggest discount, or how do you have whatever? Remember, was it just a couple of weeks ago when Spotify was all over the news because they, Adele asked, I work hard on how this record is lined up, don't shuffle it, right? And then Spotify created value by allowing people to start, listening to an album without it being on shuffle. So, and I'm using that as an example, like that's not the game changer of the world, but adding value doesn't have to be some outsized craziness that, we need crazy budget in order to do that.
Yeah.
Understanding what your customers are looking for, respect them as people, and figure out what they actually, want more of and what they really want less of, right? And I think if you understand that and actually listen and hear what they're saying, you'll give yourself permission to go after those, if you call them pivots, but adjustments in the business.
Yeah, no, I love everything you're saying. And I think one of the conversations we had earlier was really, at the end of the day, it all comes down to understanding your audience, their values and needs, and really the conversations that they're having, right? So like Spotify is a good example, right? So like consumers, they love their artists, they're big fans, they want to interact with them in a meaningful way. Same thing with, any sort of brand, right? So it's really about what you mentioned, storytelling. So I'd love to understand, how are you identifying Thistle's audience and understanding their values and needs? So that's really like the piece A. And then, we can talk about how do we create content and marketing that's really going to resonate with them.
I think the probably upside of the last 10 years is thinking you knew your customer because you had all these data sets, made marketing, I'll just call it simple or easy. And I think now you have to really elevate that and, really show appreciation, respect. I think zero-party data is a big deal for us at Thistle. You sign up, you go through this onboarding flow. We are asking you for a bunch of information that we're not getting from third-party data sets. But then we actually understand, what are you looking for? Oh, Lee likes, these things. So how do we create more of that for Lee and for people like Lee, right? We don't hit them with another email. I think this is something that all marketers need to appreciate more. We don't hit them with another ad. These are people. I think we were taught young, you don't hit people. But like, again, showing respect. And I think when you start to tease out the pieces that people are raising their hand and telling you, this is what I want more of, and this is the stuff that's not important to me. And then if you actually then respond and give them the value that they're looking for, then they reward you with lifetime value, right? So, and I think that's the component. At Thistle, there's some examples that really started making their way through where, now, without a doubt, we're in the health and wellness and nutrition space. But people were saying, as part of this onboarding survey, that they want Thistle to provide even more information for them on how they think about health and wellness and nutrition. And then we started looking into what they're wanting, and they wanted more information on recipes. We have delicious food. Everyone, and people always want to know, what goes into that. So we actually really aggressively put that in the forefront. So we give you the recipes. We support local farmers that practice sustainability and focus on fair living wages. We tell you where where the ingredients are coming from. So all these pieces of, what is the food that you're eating, know where your food comes from kind of thing. Yeah. We put that at the forefront and we share that with customers and they found great value in that. Another part was, customers are always looking for ways to get fit and stay healthy. So as part of that, what we launched was a nutrition coaching program for new customers that come on board to make sure they're getting set up correctly and understand Thistle fits into a whole bunch of these areas of part of their overall wellness journey. and then it's, finding these other pieces around just general fitness content, right? So I think, it's those examples where we asked with respect, and then people give us the answer, and then we reward them by providing the information they're looking for. It's not just, some folks will ask 1,000 questions and never even, give you back the information you're looking for. We're not in that. We make sure that we try to package it and put it back for the customers in a way that creates value for them.
Yeah, definitely. And it's really just about storytelling, right? So figuring out, again, like that data and making it seem accessible and relatable. Also, I think something about you guys as well is just the beauty of the food. Like really, like, it's not only healthy, which of course everyone is prioritizing, but I will admit I'm a sucker for good packaging, and you guys have done it amazingly well. So would love to kind of hear, like, what platforms have you been leaning into this past year? And what do you think you're really going to look into, coming 2022, as everything is moving so quickly? How have you guys kind of like looked at platforms and identified which ones are the best for Thistle and reaching your audience?
Yeah, and I'll caveat everything. We do a lot of things really well, and there's a lot of things we're still trying to figure out every day, right? Like, and so, to make sure we all feel like we're all trying to do hard things. Right. So, and if anyone says they got to figure it out, they're probably about to get past, because no one has it figured out. For us, we're in a DTC space. So we're in your standard marketing stack of, the standard digital places. We're not on TV yet. One challenge I can talk about is from a content creation. We don't have tons of video. So getting behind that on, whether any sort of like OTT or terrestrial, whatever we want to look at, we're not big there yet. But one thing has been interesting, like direct mail has come back. SMS continues to be a big deal. But I'll put a couple sort of caveats there. I think direct mail works because it has 100% open rate, right? SMS works because it has 100% open rate, and I think those things, that how do you actually break through the noise and how do you actually get the attention of the customer are definitely going to help, get through that. For us, we saw early, a lot of DTC brands were very over-indexed in the Facebook ecosystem with a little Google ecosystem. So diversification was a key strategy of ours for 2021. And so when all the iOS updates started changing from a targeting perspective, fortunately, we're a little bit ahead of the curve from a diversification there. So we weren't overly reliant on any one partner. And that allowed us to continue to accelerate our growth throughout the year. Unfortunately, I've heard other brands that, have had a hard time, reacting, because they were still in the 90% Facebook ecosystem. Right. And when all the retargeting dries up, you're sort of stuck, right? Yeah. So I think, that's the component where does 2022 go? It's continued diversification, but the balance for marketers, right? For advertisers, how do you make sure the next dollar spent is more efficient than the previous dollar? Yeah. So, in order to make tests, you have to make bets. And that's a job that marketers are in, be more curious than everyone else. So then where do I think the next highest level impact from that dollar spent is going to be? So we'll continue to find diversification. Word of mouth continues to be a really big deal for us. And how do we give customers the tools, and almost the how-to make even referring a friend even easier, right? So it's these kind of things that continue to play on. I'll be the first to say we haven't cracked TikTok, partly because we haven't had internal native TikTok users to actually create the content. And it's been amazing. I've never seen a platform where, you have to be so in the weeds on what that organic and natural feels like. So going back to your world, we do think there's a great opportunity to partner with creators to create amazing content that can be native on a bunch of different channels. Because I think the challenge of a marketer in the future is going to be, we all need to create more content. Yeah. We have limited time, energy, and resources. So how do you do that? So rely on great partners for that effort.
I love that. Well, you brought up a lot of amazing points there, and I'm trying to keep my questions going. So I want to go back to one of the things you said, which is interesting. I think as we think about, again, here we are at Brand Innovators, with a company like Thistle, obviously there's no perfect answer to this, but I think, coming from thought leaders in the space, one of the questions is, how do we move faster and smarter, right? So that's a big question. I think one of the things I'm curious about is there's so many different like platforms popping up. I mean, I work in social media specifically with influencers, and even there's just 100 new things coming up every day. Yeah. So from your perspective, like, how are you, is it, hiring people who are experts in different fields? How are you staying on top of everything that's coming out so quickly? Obviously you can't do everything all at once, but staying diversified, I think, is a really important piece that you mentioned. I'm curious your perspective on how you try to stay ahead of the curve.
I mean, I think the last word you said, like, you just have to be curious, so you got to read all the things, you got to interact in all the places. And I think, the main thing is, from my point of view, and I could be totally wrong on this, instead of trying to do 50 things, okay, how do you do a few things really well, right? So you won't find a spread super thin in a whole bunch of categories, fingers crossed and hoping that, something can work out. But how do you give yourself permission to actually put a real test in place in some channel or category and things like that? So I think those are the components. And then as you're working with content creators, both internally and externally, find out where they're native. Right. And, if they do have this outsized influence in, this Facebook group, well, give them the ability to talk through there versus someone else who's a TikTok content creator versus someone who's like just in Reels, or someone who is on a YouTube vlogger. I think it's figuring out what is native to them and then give them the power. I think going back to make sure they understand what the brand stands for and what we're about and where we're trying to provide value, but then give them the freedom to talk about it, right, in a way that's natural to them. I think the idea historically used to be, the spokesperson type, and here's the 5 things. I think you should guide people, but then give them freedom to create in their own voice.
Right. So that's another question I had for you is, obviously, as you're a brand marketer, you have a vision for the brand's key like values and your mission, while also, again, having to understand that people are on social, they love interacting with brands. They want to, almost people feel like friends with their favorite brands at a certain point. So what's your strategy in terms of, staying true to the brand, but still when you're working with creators, right? So whatever platform it may be, basically giving them the kind of freedom to still make it, their own unique voice and reach their audiences they know they can, while still, relaying the real visceral mission.
Yeah. I mean, and maybe I'll push back on that first point of people love interacting with brands. No, they don't. They love great content, right? And I think that's a component there that is important to differentiate. No one wakes up in the morning like, oh, I can't wait to go like a post by and so even favorite brands like Apple, like no one does that. But if you give people the permission to be creative, I think we all, as people, we all like to engage with creativity, right? And I think that is probably that difference. And it's not just for influencers, right? Externally, even internally, right? Like, how do we give people the permission to be creative, to have different points of view, to pull this test forward or try that as a new way to think about it? And understanding that not everything's going to win, not everything's going to be a home run. But if we're constantly moving forward and bringing people along on the process, I think that's the key component. Going back to what does the brand stand for? At Thistle, and this is something that I think we're challenged with, and all brands is we all stand for all these amazing things, but what's most important to get someone to try the product, right? And for us, people have to know we have delicious food. And we're lucky because since we are plant forward and the whole concept of eat the rainbow, every meal is gorgeous, right? So we have to make sure that is front and center. And then, from a hierarchy, and it's super convenient, that's pretty amazing. And you're also going to be healthy. And then lastly, and we stand for something that's bigger, right? Whereas if you readjust that hierarchy, if you lead with healthy, consumer's going to assume, it doesn't taste good.
Yeah.
Right. Or if you lead with plant forward, well, wait, I don't want to be vegan. Why that's not for me. Right. So understanding the hierarchy is, I think, super important. And then bringing people along on that conversation is key to helping that brand essence come through.
Definitely. And you mentioned the importance of content. I think that was a very good point to make. It's not like people are chomping at the bit to go like all their brands' different content that's coming out. But I think because content has become so engaging, as you mentioned, like TikTok, it's not the easiest code to crack, but everyone kind of knows they have to be on it. Would love to kind of hear your perspective of the explosion of short form video, and how do you think it's really gonna make an impact next year from an industry standpoint, and how it's impacted your plans moving into next year?
Let me see. I'll say the challenge with needing to have so much content, and it's always has to be created, is very real. Right. So I think that is a key component. And then understanding this short form videos live in all different places, I think is super interesting. One thing to note though, from an advertising perspective, we've actually had tons of success with still images. Right. I think if we all of us marketers think back to one of our key marketing partners, Facebook said, no, you need more video. So we all started chasing all this video. Yeah. Right. And then there's, interesting output in the data saying, well, was that really necessary or not? So I think even in that, we need to give ourselves permission to sort of question the prevailing thought of what needs to be done. So I'll put that just from advertising. But then, as you want to tell this brand story, I think, how are you present in a bunch of different platforms with native, call it programming? And I think that's the component of being reliant upon creators to help you get there. Because I think unless you have giant budgets with tons of headcount, it's going to be really hard to be able to, in reality, churn out enough. And as a brand, you don't want to just be churning out content, right? Like you want to, take time and put only high quality, amazing things.
Yeah.
I think the difference is consumers, what's high quality and amazing looks and feels very different to every individual person. I think then that is why having a bunch of short form video content created all the time is quite important, because there's so many audiences looking for so many different types of information that, bringing them along and providing them what they're looking for is going to be super important.
Definitely. And I think that's a conversation, my team has a lot. We talk with our clients, is really understanding, again, the audience. So demographically, who are they? Psychographically, what do they care about? And what content are they already engaging with, right? So there's going to be different, like you mentioned, like maybe your yogis like one thing versus some people who are just all about sustainability versus the vegans, right? So how do we craft our content in a way that really resonates with them, and in the most significant way? And speaking of that,
I'm sorry, and then when you package that, I think in the world of yesterday, then we would go try to target these audiences and, show this content to them. I think if you give permission to the creator to do what's natural for their audience, it's already defined who the customer is going to be. Right. And I think that is also a key component of understanding of your customer can be extremely narrow if you force it to be extremely narrow, or your customer base can be quite broad, and appreciating that the old, adage of demographics has shifted. It's much more important to be around psychographics. And then from there, each of these creators have their own audiences. And then how do you promote more to their audiences? You might be surprised at where your customer base can go.
100%. I agree. And I think we've talked a lot about creators and how they really obviously help from a content standpoint and creating really beautiful content. As you think about, I've been working in the influencer industry for about 5 years now. How have you seen the role of influencers and ambassadors change over the past couple of years, and where do you see it going? Obviously, it changes so fast, and there's TikTok, there's Meta, there's all these things that are coming out. It feels like the world's becoming very digital, but I'm curious your thoughts on where kind of the roles of influencers and these content creators is going to go.
Yeah, one thing I am excited about and appreciating, I think 5 years ago, it was all about, the Kardashian or Chrissy Teigen type. Yeah. That's what an influencer is. And then you started going down to these, we call them key opinion leaders. Maybe not as big, but still super influential across another. Now, what I do think though is if someone can create amazing content, the ad platforms allow you to find audiences. So that becomes less important. Like that individual creator's reach might be less important because the tool allows you to find the audience and drive the awareness. So I think where you'll continue to see shifts is more authentic creators that they individually may not have 100, 200,000, people tracking their content specifically, but they're going to create amazing content, right? And then how do you then use that content, of course, in advertising, but also on site, in emails, in follow-up? I think that's where it's going to be also interesting. And then as we are, believe it or not, getting out into real world type things, how do you sort of bring them along in that physical experience? I think is the big opportunity that is coming back now, where you can, one, help them get awareness, but two, help your customer base, find value in that. So I think we're shifting more towards, what we go from, what was above macro down to macro, down to
mega macro influencers.
So I think that's where that transition is going. There's something super interesting and unique of the power that creators have these days. It's amazing. And how do we support them at all their different levels? To me, I think that's also just an important part of the equation to appreciate that these are all a bunch of individual businesses that you're working with. Now, I'll say maybe the side that isn't as amazing is that now you're dealing with all these people with their own perceived value and what that actually means, right? So like everyone has an agent and a manager to work with, and it sort of slows things down. And how do you break through that? I think there's some challenges there, but have an appreciation that they are creators and there's value in that, in what they are actually creating is going to be important.
Yeah, 100%. I think a lot of the things you brought up is it's all really like a larger ecosystem, right? It's not just, okay, we pay you a one-time fee, you turn out that content. It really is like now, especially, there's all these creators, we're looking at multicultural creators, and they really are different businesses, and we're giving them opportunities to create incredible content and make connections, right? And I think another thing that you mentioned is utilizing it for your holistic marketing, right? So these people are creating content, but we always kind of think of influencers too as like a Yelp review, right? Like you're already doing other things across marketing, whether it's your direct mail, and then you may see a familiar face talk about this all, and that's like the final thing to get you to get the subscription. So I think, influencers are super important. It will be very interesting to see where they go. To your point, like it really started with like all about the influencer, who has like the biggest name. Now it's really all about, okay, who has high quality content and reaches our audience, and how can we use data to utilize them best and create real partnerships, right?
And even the last that you made around, and then maybe as that friendly face that made the decision, the whole concept of a customer journey, I think is quite interesting now, right? Yeah. The funnel has shifted, and there's tons of different ways customers are coming to you and learning about you and finding out more. So having an appreciation of that it all has to work together is also important. Otherwise, you wouldn't invest in anything except for like one or two things. But when you go back on that lens, you'll see how it all actually works together.
Definitely, 100%. And it's so important to see, really the holistic view. Yeah. I think another question, I remember, it's just funny because I remember going to like my first conferences out of school, and everyone was like, how do we reach millennials? And now it has completely changed, and we're all like obsessed with Gen Z. So for our shining moment to talk about Gen Z, how are you guys thinking about them, the way that they consume content, the way that they're like shopping, and kind of how are you guys, we've mentioned a little bit about this and staying innovative, but how are you guys thinking about reaching them and kind of staying ahead of the competition? Because there's so much out there for them.
I think if your whole marketing stack is set on how do I reach Gen Z, you're probably missing a lot of other things. I think if you flip it to, again, how do I show respect for my customer base, either current customers or potential customers, it could look a lot of different ways. And that probably shifts a little bit of the old school thing of demographics to modern day psychographics. We talked about the macro trends. I think those are very real across all generations, right? So, are they time starved? Do they want to spend money on stuff that matters to them and their health? Do they care about the planet and, their fellow, citizen? Yes. So then if you actually are creating a business that supports all those aspects, I think it's going to be a key component to finding success there. I think the bullshit monitor, for Gen Z is pretty tight. They've been told a lot of things for a lot of times, so, and if you're not coming through in an authentic way, you're going to get dragged pretty quickly. So I think it just goes back to that respect, of, I'm a person. And I think even as we think about, omni-channel, I think something about that aspect of how that journey looks, a consumer doesn't think about omni-channel. They're not worried about how this company's SMS strategy is different from their direct mail strategy and different from their mid funnel and bottom funnel, right? Like they just want to be able to find information that is helpful for them to make a decision. So having, again, that ecosystem marketing stack versus single pillars, I think is going to be important. But I think that's the key component. Like, we're digitally native, things that different generations may feel annoyed by, this generation doesn't. Things that different generations don't think it matter, this generation really does, right? So I think it's just understanding that and having that appreciation.
Yeah, definitely. That's very true. I think people do get fixated on like what the young people are thinking these days, but honestly, it's funny because like they used to think it was like, oh, it's only like young people on TikTok, but now it's like pretty much everyone's on it, right? So there's more and more like diversity in the audiences across these platforms. So it's good to think about it more holistically.
And I'll give you a real life example that Thistle is challenged with. Again, as we talked about, we make delicious plant-forward meals that are delivered ready to eat. So for Thistle, what do you put that in? What do you put the food in to actually get the delivery? There's nothing that has that can keep it as fresh as possible, as delicious, and protect the food, because we're dealing with a lot of leafy greens and veggies and all things like that. Then plastic, right? Compost, it pulls a lot of the liquid out. It doesn't look as well. Only 11% of Americans have access to compost of the actual vessel, even though we all just put it in a big bin, right? Like it doesn't work like that. So for us at Thistle, like we use plastic. And people who care about that, they're very vocal. So a part of that is educating, well, of all the things you can do to have a positive impact on the planet, eat less meat, like focus on health and wellness, blah, blah. The plastic that your food is served in is the smallest portion of that, right? So it's even educating because so many people have been greenwashed for so long. So how do you actually give people facts and understand how it works in? But that's an example where people are super passionate about sustainability, as we are. But how do you bring them along on some of the decisions you make as a business?
Yeah, no, I love that. And it kind of leads into my next question. And we can think about this either in terms of like sustainability in the industry that you're really in, or really just marketers in general, given a lot of the challenges we face are the same no matter what vertical we're in. What are some of the, and I know we kind of talked about the macro trends, what are some of the major challenges you think we're going to face as marketers next year, just given how fast everything's moving?
I'm sure it's different for different businesses and different businesses of different sizes. For example, I think all of us in marketing were probably a little shocked by the CPMs that the digital space was seeing, really starting early in November. And then a big part of that, you had all these legacy companies that used to just rely on foot traffic, now had to drive e-com traffic. So they dumped so much budget into the digital space, which drove CPMs up, right? So I think as marketers, it goes back to, how do you actually show the most respect for your best, proponents, ambassadors, which are your customers? And then how do you give them outsized value to make sure that they are having an amazing experience that they can tell friends about, right? So I'm breaking through that. I think an additional challenge, for marketers is going to be, to your point, how do you balance I need to move quickly, get things out, because we're all, limited time, energy, and resources but I also need to be super proud about what I am putting out in the market. And then probably the last one is, how do you balance everything that's going on in society? Right? Like as brands, I used to think that brands had an opportunity to stand up for what they believe in. Now I think brands have a responsibility to stand up for what they believe in. And how do you make sure you're using as a brand your platform to, actually raise awareness for things that you're interested, that you're passionate about, and risk at some point you're going to piss a bunch of people off, with the whole, stay in your lane mindset. So as a brand, you need to embrace that. This is what we care about. This is why it's important. And this is what, why we will continue to, put our dollars and efforts in this area. But I think those three things are probably going to be a continued challenge for marketers.
Yeah, 100%. I love, and that final point too is something that I think is really interesting over the past couple of years, just given all the social movements and crazy politics we've gone through. It's really been like brands are being held accountable to take a stand on these topics. One thing given this all obviously is a company that's surrounded around health, wellness, sustainability, what to you is the most important thing about creating a company culture that really embodies that for your employees and your consumers? Like, what are some of the most important things that embody that for you guys?
For us, one, I'll say, I think we have a pretty amazing culture. I think it starts with, do you respect the person that you're working with, right? It's very big, we can't have fiefdoms, which I think used to be how, siloed approaches to work comes along. But you need to respect the person, what they stand for, and make sure they feel comfortable showing up as themselves, right? One thing I think has been interesting as we've all been in these Zoom boxes, where I think you are seeing people being more themselves. We all don't have to get super dressed up every morning to go sit at a desk all day, right? Like, I think you're seeing people's more natural selves come through. But I think a key component of this is how do we make sure that everything isn't transactional? And I think that's a challenge we have in this Zoom environment. So how do we set aside time to make sure that, I'm getting to know you, Lee, as a person, you outside the office, what gets you excited? Because those small, water cooler conversations aren't happening right now. How do we make sure that they do?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. We had, over the past year, influential's grown a ton. And so just to your point, like, you feel like these people, we talk every day, like you're in a Zoom box. So we just had our first kind of holiday party, and we all had name tags, and it was just incredible to see like everyone in person. So there's wonderful things about, working from home, but you can't beat just like having that interpersonal connection as well.
Right. And all of a sudden everyone is 6'5", it seems.
Oh yeah, exactly. I'm like, I'm a tall girl. I always shock people. So I'm like,
Me too.
It's like you got to keep people on your toes. You can never really tell.
I'm a tall girl, and then I show up in heels too. So
there you go. You got to lean into it. So.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. Thank you guys so much. This was such a wonderful conversation, and what a great way to round out our content for the day and for our session today. Really interesting what Thistle is bringing to the marketplace. Really appreciate the way the brand is supporting customer goals and getting healthy to really their end state of healthy. I thought that was really insightful as well. Also loved your, consumers don't love interacting with brands. It's true. I love that you have that really realistic approach to, consumer engagement, good, realistic perspective. That's always important. So, and I really thought it was interesting. I've been in the food industry for many, many years, restaurant side and CPG, food and beverage. And what you said about the plastic and the packaging, and that from a sustainability standpoint, really that plastic is your best option to deliver the best product, but you really need to educate the consumer about that being the least impact on the environment. And they, I had no idea. And, I'm sure most consumers don't have any idea. So really important stuff.
And not saying we love plastic. We don't. We want to find a solution.
Right, of course. Yes, of course. But I just think that was, that's kind of a key thing that, you'll have to work through and something that people don't think about because we just have been told, recycle, plastic is bad, and thinking about all the other things too that we can do to be more sustainable is important as well. So thank you both for joining us and really closing out this amazing 2022 predictions livecast. Your insights, your personal predictions, really invaluable for our community. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye. Have a great holiday.
You too.
And that's the end of our sessions for the day. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you everyone for joining us and tuning in. Big shout out to our speakers, our moderators, sponsors, and our audience. Be sure to check out the Brand Innovators website to learn about our upcoming events. We have lots of amazing content planned for you in 2022. Have a great day and a wonderful holiday. Thanks.